phone, you mean? Yeah.
Okay.
All right, great. So we are live. We're not live, but we are being recorded. Okay, so first up on the agenda is, I'm sorry?
Oh, she said pointed away.
Oh, we did.
Right on Anna.
First up on the agenda is public input. So I see we have some folks from the public. Would anyone like to address the board at this point? There is another public input point as well, so. No? Okay, all right, thank you for coming, appreciate it. So next up, we'll have our individual board updates. And why don't we start with Sarah from Mount Vernon?
Well, let's see. So we had a great meeting, our last meeting. We talked over some test score results. Christine is always great at going in depth on those for us. We talked about some of the end of school year initiatives. So we had tried a fruit initiative, got some kind of mixed reviews on that, I would say, and but interesting. And so I think all is going well up the hill.
Great.
Yeah.
Any questions for Sarah?
What is this fruit initiative? Exactly.
I can let Steve talk about it a little bit.
We try to experiment with providing for each student when they come into school each day with a piece of fruit.
Oh.
To start the day with their bellies full and ready to learn. And kids walk in the door, they'll be given an option of selecting or not selecting. We got some positive feedback from kids and not so positive feedback from the folks that had to deliver the fruit. So we are going to probably hold off on that from doing that again. But the 2-week pilot I felt went very well. Kids loved it for the kids that I spoke to, but it was a little bit more difficult in the execution. So.
Great.
We're not going to let it drop, though. There's work to be done.
Yeah, we're going to try to figure out a more appropriate,
Another way.
effective and efficient way of delivering it. So.
Yeah.
What if you guys got to just the classrooms to where?
They tried that. So I think they tried implementing it in a few different ways, and I think it was a little bit more difficult logistically than anticipated. Like fruit peels here and there, and maybe squished bananas, and
Storage.
yeah, so storage. So we'll see.
Do you feel as if Terry's input has some extra pizzazz tonight for some reason?
There wasn't supposed to be a camera tonight. I didn't know.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Beth from the Empress.
That's internet. That's not gonna work, that's internet. That's
We're solving power problems.
Sorry, we're having power problems.
Can you give us your board update?
Yes, sorry, they handed it to me, just looked at me. So we have two things. Next year, our 3rd and 4th graders over at Wilkins will be moving over to ACE. AMS is going to be taking a year off to because it's a little time consuming at times. So they're going to take a year off from it. They'll go back to the regular state level testing. We're not stopping our involvement and really the underlying concept of PACE and really what PACE means. We're just going to be taking a year off from the testing or the assessment aspect of it as a reporting method back to the school. Just at the middle school, but 3rd and 4th grade over at Wilkins will be doing it. We also actually just ended a meeting about 20 minutes ago where we approved closing the Clark Septic project, so we get to return a large chunk of money back to town. I'm quite excited. Almost $78,000 back to the town, or it'll be used to offset taxes in the tax base for this year. So.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for Beth? All right, so next is, Keegan and Jim Manning, just let me know he's a few minutes away. Our vice chair is Kim, who also is not attending. So we would go to our secretary.
Who wasn't there?
Who wasn't at the last meeting? She wasn't at the last meeting.
Oh,
He was on vacation too.
Oh, and I was not at the last meeting. I was on vacation. So let's see, who's
Dave or Laura?
Dave or Laura. So can either of you enlighten us on what happened at our last meeting?
One thing, we returned $600,000. I gotta get that out there. Something like that, right?
We win, sorry. No.
Where did that come from?
mostly special education related, out-of-district tuition, special education transportation savings, our reconnoiter contract with Caring Hands that we save money from,
Oh, nice.
but almost exclusively related to special education.
Great. Well, congratulations. So Megan.
So $678,000.
Right, that's what we're looking at.
And we're not done, we haven't figured out our exact surplus yet, so.
That's great. All right.
3 more days.
That's right. We still have 3
Three
days.
days. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the reconfiguration committee update. So turn that over to Sarah as well.
Okay, we had our last meeting, hang on, let me grab it. We had our last meeting June 13th. We addressed some issues that we had updates on, labor issues potentially, pretty good discussion on that. We have some work to do over the summer on, talking to our new business administrator about potential scenarios and what that might look like from a financial perspective as far as how things might play out. So really at this point, we're kind of in limbo waiting for that BA to come in so we can have those conversations and start getting that work done. So not too much since the last time we talked, just fleshing out the issues that are already on the table.
Any questions for Sarah? Thank you, Sarah. Okay, next up is the superintendent report, so I'll turn it over to Adam.
Thank you. First, I'd like to ask Terry Dean, who sits on the school start time subcommittee, if you'd be willing to give a brief update on the work of that committee.
Sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's
Do you want me to do it?
no, it's fine, it's fine. We were all a little hot and sweaty earlier, the committee hour, but I'm cool and collected now. So we have been meeting with, Butler is looking at all of our routes right now, our bus company, to see if we can tighten those up and have some efficiencies so that it will help to inform the work that we do with start times. It will just, so we can see really how close we can get the turnarounds. We are expecting to hear back from them July 11th.
We're hoping that we can have a conversation with them. Yep.
So they also redid some in Milford, which is interesting. So they have done it pretty recently. They had a new person come in, and we're really hoping to see some benefits from that in this coming school year. And then that's just going to help us as we make plans. And we've also been talking to other school districts. And the ones who've already made changes say that the transition, like any change, is a little bit difficult. And it can be a little bit rocky, and some people are happier than others. But at the end of the day, nobody wants to change back to their original times. And so we took that as a positive thing, that even though we know that change can be hard, we're doing it for the right reasons, and we feel like we hopefully will get to the same place. That once we can get through that first year or so, then everybody can get used to it, and that they'll be happier at the end of the day. With those, we have been reaching out to other districts, and we've also been reaching out asking for some of the lessons they've learned, and we're still waiting to hear back because they were in their own end of year flurries. So we're still talking to some of them. We've been talking to sports, and Dan can speak to them a little bit better than I could. But he's just now planning the next 2 years out for high school.
He's planning 2020, 2021 right now.
And we're also doing master schedule work in pretty much all of the districts, I think, and especially in our middle school and in our high school. And they're looking at trying to rotate to where kids who are in sports now, whether it's with new start times or not, they're not always missing the same period or in the same class. Because it can be really difficult. Let's say you're in something like advanced math. You really need that time in the classroom to understand what you're doing for your time outside of the classroom. And it's much harder to make up. So if you're missing math, 2 or 3 times in a week, that's really, really hard to come back from. So we're looking at trying to find a way to rotate that schedule so that even if they were to miss a little bit of the end of their day, it's not always the same thing they're missing. And so there are a couple different things that we're looking at that hopefully will help in both the short term and then when we make our eventual change. So that's where we're at right now.
I have a question.
Sure.
That thing with the master schedule and missing school, is that because of extracurricular activities? particular athletics?
It takes time. We live in a state that's fairly compact, but it takes time to get places and to play games. And 80% of the schools we play don't have lights to be able to, for outdoor games. I mean, if you're in a gym, that's different, but there are a couple of seasons where it gets really tricky, and it also starts to get really late, and so we can push back to a certain degree and say, don't come here until, or we can't get to you until, but only so much. And so we are trying to push where we can. And there's a little more flexibility in the middle school. They only set a year out at a time, so once we actually do make a change, they'll be planning for the immediate year ahead. Whereas right now he's having to plan for 2 years out with high school. So we're not an athletic family. I'm learning all sorts of things. It is, yeah, we were taking on, because that's really one of the biggest concerns, is making sure that kids don't miss it. And we're also looking at the fact that it used to be that you'd have like one game at home, one game away, and that was a pretty standard thing. And just because other districts go, oh wait, we can't do that week, we can't do that, it's gotten to where there could be up to 3 away games in a week, and that to me is like a bigger issue than just what time we can get there, because that now becomes, that's a different issue. And so we're looking at that issue as well, of really trying to push back and say, no, we can't do so many in a row in any given week. So we're looking at it more holistically. And so this is, it informs what we're doing, but it's great that we're looking at a lot of different things while we're there anyway, right? So we're trying to get efficiencies and do things that make sense, and then they'll only help us when we make these changes. So we are talking to a lot of other districts. I know that's going to be a question a lot of people have, and we definitely are, because we certainly don't want to have to learn everything the hard way.
As, once we kind of iron out the how aspect of it, we also have on our punch list to start communicating with the organizations in our area that work the after-school committee, the after-school care option for parents, whether it's New Morning or Hampshire Hills or the Boys and Girls Club, to make sure that they're prepared for us to be able to, one, maybe have more families that need it in the after-school option, but also to make sure that they're ready for the adjusted school time, and that we're not left with an hour of our kids not being able to go anywhere because they're not ready for us.
Oh, there's just a YMCA and
Boys and Girls.
No,
Yeah,
the
and
YMCA.
there's a new YMCA, so
Yeah.
we've kind of come up with a pretty exhaustive list of everything that is available, that people use for aftercare in our area, to do that, because it is gonna be effective.
So we're not ready yet, but they're definitely on our list of needing to be part of the conversation.
Does that include smaller outfits, dance schools, martial arts academies, things like that, where there is actually quite a lot of participation?
Yes.
But that's not necessarily used as an aftercare, because we're
It's
more
not
specific for
aftercare,
aftercare.
but we will still be communicating
Yeah.
with those organizations.
They also know.
Yeah, but we're not ready yet to tell them what our logistics are, because we haven't got that all worked out yet.
That was a concern raised by some.
A legitimate one.
First was it bigger, but yeah, it's definitely being.
Cool.
So Terry, I do want to move on, but I also just want to, I'm sure you guys are discussing this, but the 45-minute time period for after school where students either get extra help or participate in clubs.
We
and
are,
which
and
is, just to explain for folks, it's very important as part of Southeast's culture.
it is.
That we don't have students who are strictly involved in club activities or athletics. We have students who are involved in both, and that 45 minutes allows students to do that. So it's really, I'm not saying that has to stay, but there has to be some mechanism to address that issue.
That is definitely a part of
Okay,
every meeting
great.
that we have.
It is, and we're looking, to be honest, I can talk to you more offline, but we.
Yeah, it's okay. We don't need to get into a long discussion. I just want to.
We were looking
Make
at
sure
some
that's
other creative
being
ways
looked
to
at.
maybe make sure that one of our concerns right now is that kids who have to take the bus home don't actually get that time, right? Because they now have to find a way to get home.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at, as we're looking at the master schedule, if there's also a way to slightly expand advisory and once a week make it something that could be open-ended where they could get help during that time, or have club time 1 day a week or 2 days or whatever during that time. That's a model that's worked in Nashua and in some other surrounding areas. And so we're looking at creative ways that we can look at the schedule to make sure that we're addressing all students and giving them that opportunity, because right now, even for teachers staying, it's not consistent across the board. Most tend to stick around and be available, but it's not everyone every day, and so we want to make sure that all kids have access to that time. And so we're looking at all things.
Like a working advisory.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
So it wouldn't be every time. It would be
Right.
some of the time.
Once a week would even do it
Yeah.
for many of that stuff.
Yeah,
So we're trying to be creative.
great.
While we're at it.
Thank
Right.
you. All right, so.
I'll continue by superintendent.
Oh, I'm
report.
sorry.
Thank you.
Let's move on.
Yes.
I wanted to update the board on personnel changes at the SAU. As you recall, we discussed several changes that were upcoming, including reconfiguring some positions. The board felt comfortable with doing that as long as I kept you informed, so here I go. First, the data coordinator position has been expanded to be have a different focus and a different role. We really need that position to own the Empower system and support our buildings and our teachers with that process, as well as work on our data dashboard system that we have. We posted that position, had 3 applicants, and Galen Trimbley was hired for that role. So she starts on Monday in that role. Let's see, Michelle Proto, our new business administrator, will be starting Monday, who was hired several months ago. Many are excited, but none more than me. In the HR department, we reconfigured the human resources department. Instead of having 3 positions there, we'll have 2 fully dedicated positions. So Carrie and Maureen DeBrunier will be the HR department. Also, Karen Rimmel, who is the assistant director of special education, is moving to Amherst to a spot previously filled by Lisa Femia-Ho, who will be moving to the SAU at a halftime role. I need Lisa to see at the SAU level our specialized programs that we have, now that Sohegan is going to need to have those programs matriculate from the middle school as students matriculate from there as well. Those changes free up the funding, eliminating an HR position, reducing a special education position, to create another position in the curriculum department to support Christine and her work. So we've interviewed for that role. We've had several applicants, and we're down to 2. And we should have someone picked out. I'll be offering someone a conditional offer for you folks to ratify in August. So if any of you have strong feelings about that position or who that is, please let me know. Because once I extend that conditional offer, we're going to have that person start prior to a board meeting. So but we're very excited about that because we need the additional assistance in the curriculum realm, and the net of all of these changes is that we're $5,000 under budget at the SAU level. So just as everything shakes out, we're still under budget from a salary perspective, including the all raises and benefit changes that were assigned and shook out. So we're in the process of hiring a new executive assistant for Christine and I. That position's been open since April. We've had many applications for that position, but very, very few who are qualified. So we have 1 person we're speaking with again next week, but we'll keep that position open until we find the right person for that. And I think that wraps up all of the changes at the SAU level. One minor change, Danae has been filling in, doing board packets and board agendas and doing a marvelous job at that as well. It's a very, it makes sense to have the person doing the board minutes and who's at the meetings to be keyed into doing those agendas. So we're going to roll with that and keep going because Danae is doing a superb job. So kudos to Danae.
Did Danae read that?
Yeah.
Surprise! Surprise, Danae! Doing it forever.
So, but that's it. That's it for my superintendent's report.
I think Ellen had a question.
Can you just repeat the Karen Rimmel? So Karen is currently
Yeah, so Karen Rimmel is currently the SAU-wide Assistant Director of Special Education.
Okay.
And Lisa Femia-Ho is the Director of Special Programs just in Amherst right now. And so they're kind of swapping roles. Lisa is going to go part-time, half-time,
got it.
and Karen's going to fulfill that role. Karen really does mostly Amherst work anyway, so it was a little out of whack that she was at the SAU level, because she does all the preschool in Amherst and oversees all the out-of-district, which is, at one point it was mostly Amherst. She'll still oversee the other district at Sauhegan, and we'll bill between districts to cover for that.
Thank you. So, Steve, go ahead.
The data coordinator position, that was half-time, is that staying half-time?
It is, yeah, exactly half-time.
So Adam, I have a request as a first task for your new executive assistant.
Yes.
Could he or she create an org chart and send it to the SAU board? Because that's a
All those
lot of
changes?
positions, and it would be really helpful, I think, with the reorg for us to have a sense of who reports to who and how it all flows. So, great, thank you. Any other questions for Adam?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
That wasn't in your report, but we had a kind of a major shift in the policy season height concept.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
wanna
actually, yeah,
familiar?
that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. So, as the SAU board may recall, the SAU policy committee has been meeting regularly to deal with a backlog of policies that had not been reviewed or adopted. Actually, later this evening, our next agenda item is to adopt a policy that must be adopted to be in compliance with the law. But the policy committee has been playing catch-up for a couple of years. The board last May adopted, a year ago this past May, adopted a plan to look at having a policy season where we focus our policy work on a time of year when we're not also engaged in budget work. And so the board had adopted that as a, we'll give it a try kind of thing. And originally we had thought that the timeline would start in November and kind of straddle the election season and be done by June in time for the ensuing school year. But the policy committee today decided to shift that later and do most of the policy committee work over the summer to avoid the election cycle, because it'd be a little awkward to have policy committee members who maybe get voted out of office or don't run for re-election or resign to move out of town in March, right? So instead to avoid any of that kind of issue, we just shifted everything. And the SAU policy committee does good work over the summer anyway when school's not in session. So that was just a slight change. So that will take effect next a year from now. So we'll be asking the SAU board in March of 2020 to identify all the policies that we'll look at during that season, that policy evaluation season. We'll have some on a regular rotation. There's a 6-year rotation of all policies that we'll review once every 6 years. Some that have to be reviewed every year as a matter of course, or a matter of some statutory requirement to do so every year. And then if any board member has policies that they want us to look at during that time, any board member can also say, please look at these policies as well. And that will be the group of policies evaluated during that season.
So John is our policy committee chair, and we had a meeting today. Did you have any other updates you
No,
wanted to?
that was basically it.
Okay.
Right now, what's going to be coming is the rest of the backlog, we hope, of the summer work. We've got a full day scheduled next month to try to plow through most of that. Then the idea is it'll be quiet on policy, save for changes in law that may take effect and things like that may need immediate attention. And the concept is to come up with an idea for a theme for next year, which my thought was would be wrapped around the strategic plan and policies that may tie into that and may need to be reviewed in order to better implement the plan.
Any questions? No? All right, thank you. All right, so we can move on to the consent agenda. Any discussion, or I would take a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Steve has a question.
Oh, Steve.
Just a quick question with regards to policies. We did our first reading in Mount Vernon on these policies. Why are they back here?
SAU level ones as well, right?
So, hold on.
Yeah,
The ongoing challenge in policy.
it's because they're also.
Because these are also at the SAU level.
This is to adopt.
Oh, these are.
These are also
Yeah.
at the SAU level.
Oh, these are SAU policies.
Yeah.
So you reviewed your Mount Vernon policies.
So these probably came to the SAU, got pushed to individual boards, but then now it's pushed to SAU for SAU approval
SAU
as an
approval.
SAU policy.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably duplicative, but.
Well, but they should have they should have a reading and approval, SAU.
SAU.
Yeah.
So is this the first reading or the second reading for this?
This is second.
This is second for these, yeah.
I have a question on
Yeah,
that as
go
well.
ahead,
At what point are the districts that have adopted the policies in the heading, in the header? Because the idea now is, to the greatest extent possible, have one actual electronic document that is the policy. And and all of the web links to it filter to one document. So that if you make a change, you're making a change to one document. In order to know which districts it applies in, the idea is to have the districts that have approved it in the heading. So you can look at one policy and say, oh, it applies to everywhere, all four. Or this is a Sauhegan only, maybe it has to do with early graduation or something that doesn't apply to elementary schools or middle schools.
So that's on the one
Yeah.
that we did a first reading for in a moment.
Does it have all 4 districts on it? Okay, good.
Okay, this one has
So this
zero.
one doesn't,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is why I was worried.
Yeah, so Christine and I can work with you today on that to just make sure that the heading is correct. Is that considered just a
It doesn't require a
editorial change, so we can still vote on these? Yeah.
Yeah.
Comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, it's not just about good management of paper, but it's about if you have 4 policies that purport to be the same, they may not actually be the same. And then which one do you update?
Yeah.
And did the other one, does that actually filter through
Right.
or not?
Right.
I mean, it's a liability control issue as much as it's a headache control. So.
All right, so back to consent agenda. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave, go
So
ahead.
technically, what you're saying, John, is that the policy is not approved as a policy until the SAU does it, is that correct?
No, I don't think so. The idea is to just kind of streamline this, is that policy committee does a first take of a policy.
Right.
And we might solicit feedback from relevant experts in the field. So from nurses about having them to administer medicine, or the police chief about safety, school safety issues, and so on and so forth. Then it comes here for our first read, and by the time it gets down to the individual boards, all the big questions, all the big problem areas hopefully have been ironed out, so that it's more of a routine matter once it gets down to the individual boards to adopt.
So, but when does adoption actually occur for Sauhegan, for example? Is it at the time that Sauhegan approves it,
Yeah.
but not the SAU?
So I think that there's some confusion because there can be policies for all 3 districts as well as an SAU policy. So the SAU board will approve their own SAU board policy.
So this is to adopt as SAU policy.
Yeah.
This is, which applies to the SAU organization,
Yeah,
not to each individual board.
right. So this is an SAU board policy, not agreeing to push it to, say, 70.
For
We already
example,
did
Dave,
that.
these ones already went, the ones that are in the packet already went to our meeting a couple weeks ago. So they're adopted in Mount Vernon, but they're being adopted at the SAU level.
Maybe
As well.
there could be clarity in the agenda packet about.
To say that this is an SAU board policy.
I had it in the Trello board, I get it.
Yeah.
Had consent agenda approval for SAU board.
But it should say that it's an SAU board policy.
Yeah.
Because the SAU board
Right.
discusses policies for all boards, so.
And just a matter of history, a couple of years ago, the big theme was to get through our financial policies, and haven't been like that in a long time. We pushed through all of that, and that was successful. Last year, the big push was to find policies that are either required by law or highly recommended by the New Hampshire School Board Association that we didn't have, okay, or that had been updated way after our most recent update, maybe there's a 10-year gap, to make sure that those, especially the ones that were required by law, were proper and in place. What we're doing now is, the theme this time has been trying to figure out which policies should apply to the SAU, because the SAU actually didn't have any policies specific to the SAU. So this is collecting all the ones that apply, and looking at them again, going through the process of trying to harmonize them down to a single set of 4 corners, so the words are the same. And now applying them, updating them at the individual boards, as well as applying them to the SAU.
So does the SAU have distinctly different policies for personnel? In other words, like Sauhegan has a set of policies for personnel. The SAU has a separate one, not a union?
There are some that apply to the SAU and some don't. So that's what we're in the process of doing, is combing through and saying which ones apply to the SAU and bringing those forward. So, all right, great discussion. So, okay, I'd like to move on to, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we do need a motion for the consent agenda.
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
I'll second.
So, motion by Steve, second by Beth. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Great, now we can move on to the data and security plan approval, and Christine, and is Bruce here or no?
He's not, he's on
Okay.
vacation.
Okay.
So he is available by phone, if we do need him and have any questions. I know Bruce was here at the last meeting and shared out
Yep.
regarding the plan, so we're happy to answer any questions that you might have, but, the plan does need to be approved by June 30th, so
Yep.
we are, seeking
Yes.
approval.
And everyone made well aware of that at the last meeting, so, are you doing a presentation, or this is just if there are any questions? Okay, so I'll open up the floor to questions for Christine. Dave?
What is the genesis of the template that you have? Is it come out of the IT world? Does it come out of the school world, or what?
It's precipitated by House Bill 1614 that was passed about a year ago. It requires us to have a plan such as this by June 30th of this year. So we hired the ATOM group, ATOM, not ADAM, the ATOM group, to help us develop this plan.
And the format is really based on the pieces that we actually are required to have in our plan based on that House bill. So nearly all SAUs will have similar plans with those topics and headings in them.
Dave?
Anybody else? Okay.
Dave and then Laura?
No, Laura.
Laura?
On page 43, there is the Appendix A definitions, confidential data information. Confidential data includes, but is not limited to, personally identifiable information regarding students and staff. I think that's a little broad, like any student, any staff, any information, any name. I mean, I don't know if that necessarily, any email would be confidential under that definition.
Well, so the sentence before it says, information that the SAU is prohibited by law, policy, or contract from disclosing, or that the SAU may disclose only in limited circumstances. So it's, the definition includes the requirements of RSA 91A, but it sort of assumes FERPA that we have. We're not subject to HIPAA, but FERPA is kind of our federal regulation regarding student data, but staff data as well. We have financial information for many of our faculty, our staff members. We have lots of personally identifiable information that we have to maintain and keep confidential most of the time.
Oh, I have no doubt that there's plenty of confidential information. Just this definition is just any information. So any at all.
Anything that personally identifies a student. So with this is really related to confidentiality around student data, making sure that our systems are secure, that someone can't access information about a student such as their address, for example.
So personally identifiable information is defined on the next page. Maybe that would be helpful to reference. So it's any information about an individual maintained by an agency, including 1, any information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity, such as name, social security number, state assigned student identification, date and place of birth, mother's maiden name, or biometric records. And 2, any other information that is linked or linkable to an individual, such as medical, educational, financial, and employment information.
Right.
That's the definition.
things.
But it's such as their name. I mean, a name is a pretty broad definition of confidential information. Is this format, is the structure, is this definition defined by the law?
That was the task put upon the Adam Group, is to make sure our policy was consistent with the law. I've not cross-referenced definitions to make sure that they are, but I would, go ahead.
I just take confidential information seriously, and I want to protect confidential information. I want to make sure that everything with the name of a student or a staff member is not considered confidential, because that doesn't necessarily qualify.
Well, and there's state statute that makes it clear that directory information is not considered confidential. So if we got a request tomorrow from a member of the public for the name of all of our students, we would be required to provide that, because that's directory information.
And that's in our registration packet when parents register students, that information.
Dave?
And Bruce Shacker, did he have this reviewed by a security specialist in
Yeah.
field of IT? Which school was it?
The Adam Group.
Oh, that's right, okay. The Adam Group. And do they specialize in education now, or do they?
They've done a number of these across the state over the past year and a half, since the law became required.
I'll tell you later.
So you're just looking for approval for this tonight to satisfy the state RSA need, and then we can always make modifications at some point,
Indeed.
correct? Okay.
Just to Laura's point, what is the, I don't quite understand what the issue is. I hear on the one hand that confidential information is important, and on the other hand, you don't want there to be too much confidential information. So maybe my question back is a converse question, which is, what information would you not want to be included in the definition? Do you have some specific examples? Just trying to understand where you're coming from in your concern.
I would think the name of students, the name of staff.
Should be or should not be?
No, I mean, here it's listed as confidential information. So any email you have has the name of the student.
That is true. There are some emails with names of students that I cannot disclose.
I'm not saying that doesn't mean all emails with the name of the student are confidential.
Just about, actually, because every email regarding a student is part of a student record, which according to FERPA is protected, can't be released.
And that applies to staff members too.
Not necessarily.
Because defined by this, it's student or staff, if their name is in it, it's confidential.
It may be, it may be confidential. For example, if there's an email where a staff member is writing to the Human Resources Department saying that they're going through a divorce, it would be a confidential piece of information that we wouldn't disclose. If there was a list of all the teachers teaching English next year, that certainly would be something we could disclose.
I just think it's a very broad definition. That any name of a student or a staff to be confidential information.
And a lot of times that's in reference to outside vendors. When we're sending outside vendor information, we need the vendor to understand we're sending them personally identifiable information, and we have to make sure that the vendor has certain security protocols in place, and that the way that information is transmitted, that we do that in a way that protects that personally identifiable information. So this is just saying that that's the definition of personally identifiable information throughout the document. It talks about how to control that information and what controls need to be in place.
Steve?
The idea is to separate the name of students, I'll talk about students, but it's the same thing that applies to staff, from data about the students. So we can say Susie Smith and Johnny Jones are students here, that's fine. We can say we had a student who got a 200 on the SAT in English and a student who got an 800 on the SAT in English. That's fine. We can't say Susie got the 200 and Johnny got the 800. So you can talk about students as names with no other attributes, they exist as human beings in the system. And we talk about all sorts of data about them, but you can't ever link them outside this building, or the school building, the name of the student with any data about them, or the staff member with their marital status, or whatever. That's why it talks about names. You really, because we send a lot of data, a lot of places, and the idea is always to have that statistical data about our performance as an organization not contain anything tied back to an individual student. So Christine can put a graph up here of the NWEA scores of every student, but we won't see names anywhere on that graph. That's why, so it's not name in and of itself, it's name attached to data that this addresses.
So, Stephen O'Keefe brought up a really good point that this is a policy that we do need to approve before June 30th. So unless we want to have a special meeting in the next 3 days, it would probably make sense for us to go ahead and do that and charge Adam and Christine with looking to further revise this policy. We can maybe have them come back to us and determine a way. There are specific issues that we want to address.
So just communicate any questions to them afterwards.
And then we can bring that back to the board. That's a good idea. So I don't know how folks feel about that.
I just make a motion to adopt the policy as written.
Okay. A second, a motion
Data
from,
and security plan.
okay, so a motion from Steve and second Carrie to adopt the data and security plan. Is there any further discussion?
Is it complete? Because there's highlighted yellow, which suggests someone was thinking about something. I don't know what that means.
It's just showing you the changes along the way.
Oh, that's just changes?
When we talked about this last month, that was the feedback that we provided.
Right.
We just added that feedback in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
All right, any further discussion? No, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So one abstention and one else voted yes. Great. Thank you. So any issues should be communicated to Adam and Christine on that.
Like the definitions aren't fully in alphabetical order.
Yeah, anything that, I mean, we can revise, we're just required. Yep. All right. Sorry, let's just get back to my cover page. All right, thank you, everyone. So next up, we have a NWEA Insights report from Christine to present. And is this going to be projected?
I can if you want. I just had a few highlights to share, and then I was happy to answer questions. Is it easier if I project?
Yes,
I
because
would
the paper doesn't look good.
Yeah, I would say that would be better.
I think for the public, it'd probably be good to
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah,
realize
we have to
I'm
print it that way.
Is it electronically printed?
Give me a minute to do that.
No, no, because I'm in the packet.
Page 7.
This is just angles toward the camera.
I know, mine's gorgeous.
Very nice and clean one.
No, it's fine.
Mine actually keeps flipping around.
Mine is not.
Oh,
Never saw it, like, I can save this because I already opened the document.
It must be that, yeah, it was set to print portrait.
Yeah.
I already have it already.
So I just wanted to,
So great, we're back online, guys. Go ahead, Christine.
yeah, I just wanted to share a few highlights. So this is our NWEA report, that is our fall to winter report. We have to finish our winter testing, and then there's a deep analysis that NWEA provides to us. This is our students from kindergarten through 10th grade. This is Amherst, Montford, and Sauhegan all together. So that's why I'm presenting and sharing at the SAU board. I'm just gonna hit a few of the slides and then can certainly move back to something if there are any questions. So I really wanted to provide you with all the information and then just highlight a few of them. One exciting piece is that our growth for this year went from last year, it was at the 50th percentile, which is right at the norm, exactly where growth should be, and we're just a tiny bit higher than that. We're at the 54th percentile for growth.
So Christina, I'm gonna just stop you
Yeah.
briefly. Just, it's helpful to have you explain why growth at 50
Yeah.
is good.
Yes.
Because most people would say 50%, that's
Yeah.
not, so.
Yeah, so the way NWEA works is that students all over the world actually take this assessment. It's an international assessment, and there are norms set for everything. So it's a norm reference test instead of a criterion reference test. It's not certain criteria. They're assessing students and producing a score based on that. The score is actually produced based on norms. So the norms, about 50% of students meet their target growth, and about 50% of students do not meet their target growth for each test. And that's just what the average is. Half of the students do and half don't. So that's what you typically see is about 50% of students meeting growth, or what you want to see. If you're below 50%, you're a little bit below the average or the norm. So you're seeing slightly lower growth, and if you're above, you're seeing slightly higher growth than most other students that take this assessment. And there are about 10 million students that take this assessment. So it's a huge norming population that takes it, and international.
Thank you.
So we're seeing a little bit more growth, and one thing we've talked about a lot is that while we certainly care about our achievement levels, we care a lot about our growth levels, because growth is taking the student from where they are and then moving them to that next level. So even if a student is a struggling student, if they're showing growth, that means they're moving, and that's a pretty important piece. Sorry, I went too fast. I did also want to point out, this is what is, the national norms. If you're gonna break students up by quartile, you obviously have 25% in the top quartile, and 50% in the middle two, and 25% at the bottom quartile, and you spread out that typical, that the students from the norming group. When you compare our students to the norming group, we have almost double what is typical in that top quartile for achievement. So that's really exciting. We have almost twice as many students in that upper level of achievement than nationally here, which also means that we have a lot fewer. Now, it could have been a lot fewer that we had in the middle two quartiles. We have about what is typical for those middle two quartiles, and it's that bottom quartile. We only have 6% of our students scoring in the bottom 25%, which is great that we have so few students. So that was one other thing I wanted to highlight. Yes.
Is it national norms or international norms?
So they say national norms, but their norming population is actually an international group. That's a good question.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead.
The 6%, I know in other assessments for the AMS over the years, how much of that can we not help? Like the students they're just special needs?
So often in that bottom quartile, so because they're being compared to the average of the norm, it is often students that are below grade level, and for a variety of reasons. They could be below grade level. They may or may not be identified in on an IEP, but they certainly could be. And if those students are working off grade level, there are times where you see huge growth and all of a sudden they're back on grade level. But it's, as Adam always says, if we had a busload of children who arrived, who none of them spoke English, and they were living in a refugee camp, this would look very different, our achievement levels, because students wouldn't be on grade level, and that would be okay, which is why we care so much more about growth. It is great though that even though we have struggling students in our system, it's a pretty small number that are in that bottom 25%. And even the bottom percent has the strongest group,
Yeah.
at least in our district
Pretend
area.
to be next.
Sorry, thank you. And then this is that was showing growth again for that quartile. But what I wanted to show you is and I'll jump, but I'm happy to go back if you have questions. I jumped too far, sorry. I think I went too far, yes I did, sorry. I wanted to show you our growth by quartile.
Oh, that was just.
It was here. Yes, so this is our growth by quartile. So you take those same students, that 6% that we saw that were in the bottom quartile, the lowest quartile here, and then looking at the total, they were in the 83rd percentile for growth, which is unbelievable. So the 50th percentile is typical growth that you would see. Our students in the lowest quartile were in the 83rd percentile for growth, which is really exciting. Our middle two quartiles, they were in the 57th percentile for growth, and then our top quartile, the 49th percentile. And we've talked about how we would want that top quartile growing as much as, you know, our middles or our lowest quartiles. So that's our area for a little bit of work there while they're growing pretty much at the norm or what's typical. We'd love to see even more growth in that area.
Beth had a question.
This number is better than last year, right?
It is.
Yes, okay, that's what I thought.
It is.
Trying to know from memory, but it
Yep.
was in that top quartile specifically.
It was in the lower
It's
40s
like 46,
if
I
I'm,
thought, or 44.
Yeah.
we better go fast because my battery's running low.
Going up.
Good trick.
I know, right?
It's a good way to move them.
We're not amazing,
Yeah,
but we're
I'm
good.
probably just, sorry.
Dave, go ahead, Dave.
Don't you have to reconcile growth and achievement as well? In other words, you know, I would agree that growth is very important, but it's where you wind up at the end of that year. That's important too. So how do you balance those two, and how do you report on that to a parent?
So parents actually see their achievement results on NWEA. They do have growth in that report, so they see both of those. We send home, they're basically bar graphs, and they show from the time the student started taking NWEA with us, probably by the end, some of those first few years might fall off, but they actually see a bar chart of their child along with the district average, as well as the national average for that grade level.
You can also see projected growth and whether they met that whether your particular student met that projected growth or not. So,
How do you derive the projected growth?
I'm sorry?
How do you derive the projected growth?
NWEA does based on their norm study. So they look at a student from,
That's all based on.
yeah, from one testing period to the next, what's anticipated for a student that started at that same RIT score for that same grade level, and what they grew in the norm study, and then every student is compared to that.
So let me just ask a follow-up to that. Does grade really mean anything if we're going to CBE? Because it's what you achieve. Grade is just an annual standard. It's not what you learned in that particular.
A great second.
Keep going, Dave.
So what's really nice, NWEA, the norms are based on expectations for students at that grade level, but the test is not. So that student can go multiple grade levels ahead or multiple grade levels below while they're taking that test to show what they actually know. For all reporting, no matter what, even if we dissolve grade levels, the federal government would still require us to report out by grade level and would still require students to take the state assessment by grade level. So there is always a grade level piece to that. It doesn't mean we have to have it in our system, but in the back end it's always going to be there. The norms are going to be more accurate for growth and so forth for that student at that grade level. So we would do the best that we could with that piece, but it is always a piece in the background, but it doesn't have to be in the foreground.
So before we move on, Christine, John had a
Yeah, and just Dave, just to touch on the growth piece, I asked this question to Christine the last Amherst meeting. So you make a certain achievement, and that now establishes your new baseline of your growth targets. So the higher you achieve, the more growth that you're expected to produce in future. So we have a high level of achievement, which is great, but it's always re-baselined to where you ended up as an individual student. So if you can continue to show growth and high level of achievement, then it's like sky's really the limit from a student's perspective. And Well, it's gone now, but
Oh, sorry.
that 49th% at the top quartile, which is 50% roughly of our students, is where we've been talking about for years now. How can we enable the top performers to grow to the limits of their potential? And that's an area where we still need to open some doors for students.
Right. All right. Christine, you wanna
Yeah.
take it?
And just one final point in looking, one thing that was significant that I noticed is our growth drops from second grade to third grade. And remember, this is from, fall testing that this starts at. So we're really looking at something happening during that second grade year in math. So we've done a lot of math work so far already this summer to address that piece. And in working with our math teachers, it seems like it's a pacing issue in second grade that continues in third grade that could be impacting our students' growth in math. So this is really helpful information to see because you can see, K-10 and have that K-10 picture. And just to point out, this D means district, so this is the district average and this is growth. The prior slide showed achievement, so you can see it for achievement as well. So here's your district average, if anyone was wondering what the D means on this. And NWEA actually produces this. I can certainly make changes, but they actually run this report for us, so that is their designation in there for that D.
Great. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Page 74, does that tell us that we're not challenging our top learners as much as we should be because we're fine, we're average, but are we not expecting more, pushing more, and challenging them more?
So this is growth, so we would expect this to be around the 50th percentile would be typical growth for students. So instead of taking the quartile, we're looking at just the decile, so that top 10% of students. And they're actually growing a little bit slower than the top 25%. So instead of 49th percentile for growth, it was 49. Yeah, this is the 46th percentile for the kids in the top 10%.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the tippy top of that 25%, or the top 25%, which is close to 50% for us, the top 10% isn't growing as fast as that whole group.
is Ellen and then Laura.
So going back to the 3rd and 6th grade historical, so you've looked back over a number of years and you see that 3rd and 6th grade is not scoring as well as the other grades have been? Is that what you said?
So we saw a similar dip. So we've only been getting this report for the past 2 years. This is a brand new report. NWEA actually couldn't produce this unless you had 5,000 students. And then they changed their report and they were now able to produce it for us, which is really exciting. So last year was the first year we received this report. So I did notice that same dip, the 2nd to 3rd grade. And then they're basically, this is not typical. These fluctuate a little bit, but basically from here, then we're trying to dig out, and then we kind of dig out. But if we never had this dip, think about where we would be if we didn't have to dig out from that.
And could that be a developmental component? The jump from 2nd to 3rd grade is huge, the jump from 5th to 6th grade
Yes.
is huge. But I would think if you were seeing it with this cohort for years to come, this tool is fantastic.
Yeah, this is an incredible report.
We used to see it from 4th to 5th.
Yep, it used to be from 4th to
That's where it
5th.
was.
4th to 5th.
Yes.
If you really
And
went
we did
back,
some curriculum work in it.
Yeah, and we did a lot of coaching work at the middle school too, and we were able to address that. So we're now seeing it 2nd to 3rd. We have made some changes. So in 3rd grade, we did feel like there was a huge jump in math from 2nd to 3rd grade in the level of expectations. And we actually went back and we looked at better aligning to standards, and we have found that 3rd grade feels a little bit more manageable for our students. We had kids crying in math at times because they were frustrated that it was so challenging, and we were looking at how we were actually going above standard for students that maybe weren't ready for that yet. So we've looked at realigning third grade, and we did a lot of math work just a week ago with our teachers. We had them in, and we're looking deeply at all grade levels, but especially that second grade. There was a concern about pacing in second grade and getting to all of the concepts in second grade. So I'm hoping that that pacing issue is
We can't make
resolved.
the second graders cry either.
Right, but we don't want to make them cry, so.
Dave?
At least not about math.
If
Right.
that-
Oh,
From
I'm
an
sorry, I
implementation
skipped
point of
Laura.
view, are we go, I'm sorry.
I skipped Laura. Laura, go ahead.
Are we going away from heterogeneous groupings? How do you keep the class in pace?
On the same concept.
If you don't have homogeneous groupings?
So we do have mixed groupings, the first time for
So you have
math.
heterogeneous groupings,
Yeah.
therefore,
So are you asking how teachers,
yeah, how do you
Support the
actually
different
implement, how does a teacher actually implement 5 different lesson plans every day?
yeah, so they're not doing 5 different lesson
Or
plans, we
whatever,
definitely have a scope and sequence, so we have a curriculum and we have like daily lesson plans for what a teacher does with the whole class. But then they will often, after they do, and a lot of times they actually start with like one really challenging math problem that students work together on. And then from there, they do a little mini lesson, and then they have students in smaller groups, and they'll work with the different smaller groups. And the smaller groups might have different work that they're working on if they need to. But we also have math interventionists that will push into the class to support that, or sometimes pull those students out to provide some of that additional support for students.
Yes,
Three
it's
things.
Yes, it's hard for a teacher.
Well, I don't get it, I don't have a kid in school anymore, so it's not like
You should come and
See this?
visit.
Oh, I didn't-
Well, no, I mean, when you're elementary school, visit.
All right, so let's just, all right, guys, we're gonna take a
But this whole idea of heterogeneous groupings, at some point, you're gonna have a class of 20, but there'll be 3 or 4 classes of 20, all taking algebra or whatever, and they'll be pacing at different levels. So doesn't it make sense? I'm not saying this should be the way it's done, but it just makes sense to me that you would group all the kids that have achieved certain, you're grouping it, you're
The
pacing
research
by.
actually shows it's extremely detrimental to students to actually group them for mathematics, especially early. And that the research shows that the critical nature of the mathematical discussion and discourse, all students having access to that and working together to solve problems. Because one student who might be struggling with their fact fluency might be a really outside the box thinker and is able to problem solve really well. So it's not just they're at this level, put them in this course. There's so many different pieces. Math is not just one thing that they're learning or one track they're on and moving. So we found that being able to keep those students together, because research doesn't support actually breaking them up into different groups, that's critical for them to have. So it's harder for the teacher. It is less efficient, but research doesn't support us doing that. So,
All right, so this is a great discussion. We're slightly off topic, so I wanted to move to Laura's question.
Status, so this report was completely generated by NWEA,
Yes.
is that correct? So status, that's based on the raw data of their actual test scores?
The status means achievement. So status is their achievement levels. So it is based on the, depending on what page you're on, looking at each grade level and what percentile our students were in and what that average percentile was for our students for that grade level.
There aren't any labels on what's really representative on the graph.
What page are you on?
On page 78, I think.
Yeah, so you can see that kindergarten, when they enter us, they're in about the 62nd percentile. And then by the time they're in the beginning of first grade, they're in the 70th percentile. So you can see how much of an impact kindergarten had. Now those are different cohorts, but we've seen that trend. And then for second grade, they're in the 72nd percentile for reading.
Right, but it's the percentile of what?
the national norming population. So they take everyone who takes the test and they say, here are all the kids and this is the grade level, this is the RIT scores. So the people, if we have 100 kids, the highest student becomes like, you know, the 99th percentile and then they back down. So that they set the NWEA, this is norm reference, so they've set those norms. So that's the norm to be in the 70th percentile or the 80th percentile. And they actually do norms both at the individual student level and also at the school level. So these are actually school level norms, so they look at schools.
So do they recalculate this each year based on what their average is for that year?
No,
Or are they comparing
they
it
actually
to
don't.
averages over multiple years?
They do a norming study, usually every 3 to 5 years, and because it takes about a year to norm this test, to look at that data and set those norms. What does the 70th percentile mean? What average RIT score would you need to get for that? So they re-norm typically 3 to 5 years, but it's a ton of work for them.
All right, did you have any other slides you wanted to share? No?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, anyone have any other questions for Christine? No? Okay, great, thank you. So next we will move to the strategic plan, to be presented by Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so this is not a short presentation, so I want to prepare everyone for that. So this
Wait,
is
should we take a break first?
Just kidding, no break.
Just kidding, no break. Hey, you guys are hardcore
Just to get to the stage.
Yeah, and you guys can shift right behind me too. Don't feel like you have to stay over there.
Do you want this on the camera?
Yeah, have fun.
No, I'm going to the bathroom, guys.
Oh.
I thought you were looking for Hawaii.
Do you want to change the camera up here?
sitting next to you.
Yeah, either me or the.
Yeah.
How's the sound?
Texting some guys, see, maybe watch my
Picture notes freely.
Yeah, none of us will notice if the camera is on the screen, don't know what it's
I think that was the first place you'd be able to do.
That was me.
Okay, so this is a culmination of the 3 years that I've been here, and all of the conversations with you as board members, all of my conversations with community members and others, all of my work with faculty meetings and the time I've spent hearing from our faculties, and our strategic planning committee, which I'll talk more about during this presentation. So the board has been patient in waiting for a plan. Is that a fair statement? I think you've been patient in waiting for a plan. And it's something that's been asked of me from pretty much the time I arrived. So this is meant to be the launching point for the board to say this is how we're going to move forward. This is not a finished product, meaning we have significant work of engagement with our community, our schools, our faculties, our parents from here. But you as the board have to set a direction first. That's how this works. Is you folks have to set and agree with the direction. We do the work of getting people continually on board, make course corrections as necessary, and move us forward. Okay? So first, a little bit of history. You might remember the last strategic plan that was in place. Keep the heckling at a...
Didn't say anything.
The last strategic plan that was in place 5-6 years ago, a significant community effort, resulted in these 5 pillars that existed in 5-pillar committees, which created a list of tasks, many of which were completed. It really was the springboard for a lot of our work around performance assessment and our grading and reporting changes that we've seen today. A couple of years ago, there was this model where the board identified areas of focus for the board, deeper learning being the primary educational component, learner agency, meaning student voice and choice, and our school culture and climate being the thing that we cannot ever change or let be changed by whatever we do strategically. I spent some time building a very simple visual depiction of some of the work that we have been doing and how it builds on itself. And so this list at the bottom, some of our bedrock things that we're working on, like performance assessment and grading and reporting, the things that come later, leading to the potential for a plan for every learner. Surveyed the board and asked, what are the important indicators of student success? What matters to you as board members? Got a plethora of responses, but some of the things that got the most votes were how our students do after they graduate from us, being the top, what the state assessment looks like, what our scores look like on the state assessment, and then how our students grow, being the top things. And then what are the three most indicators of the school system not related to student success? And so votes by voters, support by voters being the key, is what the board said. And even having an impact that reverses declining enrollment, something that brings people to town, that encourages growth of our students. And then I asked you to prioritize different measures, which I know this graph looks a little confusing. I actually had it saved as an image, so I couldn't flip it, Laura Taylor. But the most important thing was at the bottom. So NWEA growth at the bottom being the most important indicator. And you can see where some of these different things line up for the board. We hired Battelle for Kids to work on this process with us back in January. They provided us the most valuable piece of information they provided us was a current state analysis that was based on information provided by the Strategic Planning Committee and others throughout our school system that listed what our current strengths and weaknesses are as a school system. The one I want to highlight is open to innovation. I think that is probably perhaps one of the greatest strengths of our two towns is that we built a school like Sauhegan 27 years ago that was intentionally different and was meant to break the mold. There wasn't unanimity at the time that this was the right kind of school to build, but it's caught hold and it's something that's well known throughout our country and certainly around New Hampshire. And so being open to innovation, I think, is our greatest advantage in thinking about what the next steps are for us as a school system. So why in the first place do we need a strategic plan to begin with? I would start by saying that almost everybody we talk to in the world thinks that schools aren't doing a good enough job. Do we go anywhere where people say, schools, you know what, they should really be given a break or a free pass because they're doing enough? No, that's not the case. We know that there is more expectation on schools than there ever has been. And if you look at all of the things that schools do now that they didn't have to do 50 years ago, it's a remarkable list. A guy by the name of Jamie Vollmer created a list. And it started off as an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. It's now 42 inches long with different things that schools are expected to do now that they didn't have to do before. And yet we still, most people live within the same box of a school education. What does that box look like? Well, we know what that looks like. We think of school, and most people in our communities, many of them, believe it or not, some of them believe that our school's classrooms still look somewhat similar to this. Different fashion, perhaps, but still.
You would hope.
One would hope. Christine just mentioned she likes to dress in the front. But you can see Steve Coughlin on the right.
I'm gonna say that's my classroom, but I have none.
Is this personally identifiable information?
But there's some interesting questions about this photo. Where are the students with different learning styles or learning needs? We never saw them in our schools growing up, right? They were completely a pull-out model. But schools used to look like this. This is what math used to look like. Look through some of these math questions and what's the common theme? It's all about calculation, learning how to make a calculation and learning how to give an answer. Really interesting that that's how we saw math before, was learning arithmetic, right? Learning how to take numbers and add them, subtract them, and multiply them together, and that was math.
And how we and a lot was.
What's this number?
What's that?
Don't try to solve it.
By selling what part of the month of August, 7-something.
Is
18.
7/18
18th.
That sounds like one of our new math problems.
Weird.
It's real cool.
So you think through, what is the value of this kind of math in today's world, right? Think about that. So why did classrooms look like this? And why did math look like that? Because we were creating jobs that looked exactly like this, that were routine, and required little higher order thinking skills for the most part. Well, we know that the world has changed. Thomas Friedman's book is, I think, almost 20 years old now, about the world being flat. And if you read this book, it's about the 3 waves of globalization. It used to be on the national level, where we had the spice trade from India, right? The next wave of that was industry, Carnegie, etc., where industry globalized the world and they were the dominant player. 20 years ago, Friedman said, we as individuals are who have to globalize and be globally unique and have a niche in the global economy, right? And that's why mom and pop shops struggle, because the internet has upended all of the world. Our waves of innovation have significantly shortened. In other words, the amount of time it takes for an industry to mature used to take several, 50, 60 years in the beginning, and we know now that the wave of innovation is significantly shorter because of technology. People who use the internet is growing at an exponential rate. I'm not even sure this is parabolic anymore. This looks like a hyperbolic graph. But the number of people connected to the internet and are communicating on a daily basis using the internet is extrapolating at a rapid pace. Industry has completely changed. The number one industry in our country back in 1840, agriculture. And services now is by far the biggest industry. Right? So what do our classrooms look like today? Excuse for the one student whose face I very rudimentary scribbled out. But this is one of our classrooms. Why do our classrooms look like this today? It's because math now looks something like this in 3rd grade, by the way. But we're not asking kids to calculate, make calculations anymore that they can do on their parents' iPhone or any calculator that they can have. We're asking them to think and use higher order thinking skills, because the job they're going to have looks more like this, where they're solving real world problems and building F-35 Joint Strike Fighters and not automobiles that can be bolted together in the same way. So what has changed? Technology's changed everything. The global economy is flat and we relate to each other differently now. Jobs that we have, jobs that we need our students to have, are highly dependent on their ability to convince other people of what they think. Highly dependent on the ability to get along with other people that they may not like, right? Highly dependent on them being able to write and communicate in a way that's effective and compelling for the world, right? So everything has changed for our students. So I pose a question. Why are schools so resistant to change? And the reality is, the answer is they will cease to exist in the same form if we're not willing to adapt. So remember, our greatest advantage as a community, willing to innovate. And so this strategic plan is asking the hard questions about how far we're willing to go with that innovation. So with that, I turn and offer to you some thoughts for the future. I think these are some of our core beliefs. This is what I've gathered, what I think we believe in. I think we believe that every student deserves a unique roadmap to their own personal version of success. I think we owe that to every student. In that road to success, every student deserves a challenge. Many of our brightest students are doing just fine on the state assessment and making us look really good. And it appears to me that the data shows that we're not challenging them as much as we possibly could, and I think they deserve that challenge. Because our world is based on relationships and how that's changed for students and how life for our students is different, our students need anchoring adults in school that can help guide and have a mentoring relationship with them. And every student needs that. And every student needs an affordable next step. Didn't include it in the why, but our kids are not going to be able to afford college much longer. I just don't know what to say to our country about the cost of higher education anymore, besides we need to find a better way. We absolutely need to find a better way for our students. Okay, I know, but before we get too much further, that there are some things that are deal breakers for many of our people in our community. These numbers are not meant to be hard and fast. These are meant to be my ability to show you that I've listened to what I think the community expects of us as a school system. I think 50% growth is not good enough for our community. We have means, we have an engaged parent base, we have an intelligent school board, and we have a fantastic administration below the superintendent level. We should have 70% of our students hitting growth targets, at least. Right? 50% is the norm, we should be at least 70% of our students. Our school system, that's growth. Our school system should rank in the top 5 in achievement testing. If we're not one of the top 5 school systems in New Hampshire, what are we doing? What are we doing? We know where our students stand compared to the global norm of NWEA. We should be a top 5 school system. If we're doing things well, I don't think we should be passing budgets by 5 or 6 votes. We should be passing budgets with 70% of our voters saying we're on the right track. Right? We are not going to get 97% of our voters to vote yes on our budgets. Right? That's unreasonable. But I think 70% shows us that we're in the right spot. Our value, what we provide, must outpace our peers, meaning people should want to move to this town because while the school system might be more expensive than average, it should be something that provides a value that makes that affordable, that makes it seem reasonable to us. Right? I don't believe we're going to be a school system that hits an average cost per pupil. I don't think so. I don't think that's what we're made to do. But I think our value has to outpace that. And then somehow we've got to believe that most of our students, I said 85%, that's an arbitrary number, but most of our students should have their desired next step available to them when they leave us. If a desired next step for our students is to be in the U.S. Military Academy, then we send them off in that direction and do everything we can to make that happen for them. If their desired next step is a top-tier college, then we need to do everything we can to make sure that's available to them. Whether they go or not, and can afford it or not, it should be available to them. If their next step is to have no debt and to work and to do community college and to find a way to get 4 or 5, 6 years down the road with a college degree and no debt, we should help them with that as well. But our students should have their next step available to them. Okay? So, our students need to solve the world's problems. It's just that simple. I use the story of the iPhone 6 as the story that I like to share. For those of you who haven't heard it, how many of you have not heard my iPhone 6 story? Good, I'm glad. So there's some. So when the iPhone 6 came out, it was the first iPhone that had a fingerprint reader, that you unlocked the phone with a fingerprint reader. And Apple invented it, they were ready to go, but they ran into a problem with production. They needed to produce some unwieldy number, like 15 per second, every second of every day for months to keep up with the demand for the iPhone 6, and they couldn't figure it out. And so they fired their manufacturing engineer, and they pulled someone in who was up and coming, and asked him to figure out a way to make the iPhone 6 fingerprint reader be produced at mass scale. He did that. He solved that problem for them, and they went and asked him, what do you need in order to solve more of these manufacturing problems for us? And he said, I need more fellow Sauhegan graduates to help me solve these kind of problems. It's a true story from one of our Sauhegan graduates. Okay? We need more students like that to be produced from our school, because if not our students, in one of the best states in the entire country, and one of the top 5 school systems in the best state in the entire country, who else to solve and tackle the world's problems? When you talk to our students from the ethics forum at Sauhegan High School, they are preparing themselves to solve the world's problems. That's what they're there to do. And that needs to be our mantra. Okay? So, Portrait of a Graduate. We've developed internally over the last several years, and with community involvement, what we think our graduates need to have as personal characteristics. And so we have our Portrait of a Graduate. I won't spend much time looking at that. Here's another graphic that kind of describes what those things are. The things that we're working to instill in all of our students. And so I think we developed 4 areas of focus using Battelle for Kids. Now we know there are 4 structural, functional areas that we need to focus on. Obviously, student success. And these statements describe our philosophical view of these areas of focus. So I don't like reading from a PowerPoint, but I'm going to read these because they're important. So we'll provide every student exceptional education grounded in high expectations, meeting their individual needs, interests, and passions. Okay? Very important. Culture and connections will cultivate our vision of respect, trust, and courage. You might have heard those words before. That's a Sauhegan thing that we believe needs to be applied SAU-wide. It's something that we believe in. That ensures a culture of safety and promotes meaningful relationships. Community, we need sustainable partnerships within our schools and with that, outside of our schools to build meaningful learning opportunities for all of our students. And then our learning environment. We know we've got some building needs that we need to address over the next decade. All right, here's where it gets interesting. Buckle your seatbelts. Here are the things that we really think are the key strategies for us moving forward. Every student needs an individual learning plan by August of 2024. Doesn't mean we don't iterate and work on it and prepare for it, but that's the go-live date that we've set. By August of 2024, we want to plan for every single student. I'm going to talk more about each of these 4 strategies in a minute.
That's across the SAU.
Across the SAU. Half of the class of 2026, we want to graduate with 2 years of college credits in hand that they can take to state schools in New England. Okay? This is probably the most ambitious of all of our goals, the one that I feel very confident about. By fiscal year 22, we need advisory systems in place in each school that work. The name advisory doesn't fit every school, but what we mean is we need a plan for an anchoring adult to span time with students that goes beyond just a single year. And then we need to ensure that students at both ends of the achievement span have opportunities that are challenging. And those need to be in place by the end of fiscal year 23. If you read between the lines, you can tell that our data already shows that our students in the bottom decile and the bottom quartile are outpacing all of our other students in the SAU. So we have those interventions and programs in place for them. Our top 10% of our students need something else. They need something different that we need to explore. Okay? So let me break these down a little bit. Remember our key values. Every student deserves a unique roadmap to success, and so they need a plan that describes what that looks like. Here are some things that probably should be in an individualized learning plan for every student. Obviously, we assess every student to understand what they know, what their strengths are, their weaknesses, their abilities, all of the things that they bring to the table. Anything we identify as a barrier to their learning, whether it's access to nutrition at home, or a medical need that needs to be addressed with their parents, a mental health issue, any learning impairment, any of those things need to be identified so that we all know what needs to be provided for those students. Personal goal statements for every kid. What do you hope to achieve? What does the team that is around you hoping for you to achieve in your time? There needs to be quantifiable guideposts. There needs to be things that are obviously that we can measure and keep track of. The goals need to be in multiple domains. There might be some physical goals for students. Is it understandable that we might have a student whose goal is to become the captain of the baseball team? Is that an appropriate goal for a learning plan? I would say yes, it is. It's something that we're trying to work with a student to achieve. We're developing people, not just learners. Might it be that we have a goal for a student in the emotional domain that we say, your team believes you've grown in your ability to regulate yourself when you're deregulated? Right? Is that an appropriate goal for a particular student? Absolutely. And then things need to be rolled out that include the interventions that a student needs. And then one thing that we're somewhat excited about exploring with all of you is perhaps we set as a graduation requirement that every student needs a non-academic certification of some kind to graduate. What do I mean by that? How about a pilot's license for some of our kids? Or being an EMT, right? Or being an Eagle Scout or a Girl Scout, reaching a high level of whatever. For some of our students, it might be getting a driver's license by the time they graduate. That's something. Our students need to learn how to live in the real world as well, and so there's parallel option for them where they're able to deal with in a bad learning environment often, right? We all know what it takes to get certifications in the real world. Often there are hoops to jump through and things that we have to do that make no sense and that are outside of the normal learning environment we might be creating in our schools, right? Perhaps that's an option for our students that can be placed into their learning plan. And then parent engagement, including summer options. Shouldn't we be sending our kids home over the summer with things that they should be looking at if they're behind or if they want to get ahead in certain areas? Right? We need to be communicating to our parents and to our learners about what their options are for summer regression or other outside opportunities for them. We know we need things in place to support plans such as these. First, MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports, where there are interventions built in for students that have all kinds of hurdles along the way. That's something we already have in place. A data dashboard that can pull all this data together and manage it at the system level, the school level, the grade level, the classroom level, and then down to each individual student, which is something we've been working on building with a community partner over the last year and something that our new student data coordinator will be in charge of managing. We need advisors as an anchoring adult to help guide these plans, to own these plans and to be the key component, the cornerstone for these plans. but ultimately we need flexible scheduling. I think over time, the concept of a grade level and a set of courses that span an entire year, that concept needs to start breaking apart. That there needs to be much more modularity for students and flexibility along the way for students to progress at their own pace, with support, with interventions, with help, but at their own pace over time. Okay, specialized programs. Remember our core value, every student deserves a challenge. And this is really speaking about the changes we need to make at the higher end of the spectrum, which I believe is important to our community. If you listen closely to a lot of our community members, some of the ones that are most vocal about our school not being challenging enough are those who have learners that they believe are at the higher end of the spectrum. And I think there's some value to that, and the data shows that. And so this is our least articulated of the 4 strategies, but we need to think about programs that give opportunities for kids at that higher end. I think that's really going to come from deep connections with industry partners. I do not mean that we have a pull-out system or a school within a school. That's not what we're talking about. Heterogeneous grouping in many cases is still the right way to go. But we need to think about what a system like this might look like. Because I don't know what it is yet. This is something we're going to develop together, but our highest end learners need a better challenge. I think that's true. The data supports that. Okay, a longitudinal advisory system, an anchoring adult for every kid. We need and Sauhegan has an advisory program in place. So this is really expanding, tweaking this a little bit at Sauhegan, but extending it to our other schools. But the idea is daily contact time, where the anchoring adult has deep influence over that student's progression through our school system. They need to own the plan and have support from the rest of the school in supporting that plan. An advisory program needs an articulated curriculum that's followed and milestones for our programs, and obviously deep professional development for those people who are entrusted with that opportunity. Here's what we're calling the leap forward opportunity for our students, and this perhaps, again, is the most aggressive. College costs too much. Many of our bread and butter students are expected to leave our school as seniors and then go to college and take on enormous debt. And so I think that we need to explore a better way. And many of our students come back and tell us that they're more highly prepared than many of their peers in their college classes. Do we hear that from graduates often? And so we need to give our kids a more effective leg up. And so we're looking to partner with a higher ed partner. We're in deep conversations with them already. I'm not going to share who it is at this point in time, but we need to find a higher ed partner who believes what we believe, who can support us looking forward. We need to offer college credit to kids earlier on in the high school process because our kids deserve that challenge and we need them to be able to take that when they leave and go somewhere else. Flexible schedules provide that key acceleration when we need it. Flexible scheduling and the idea of breaking apart the concept of a grade level gives us that opportunity in this particular way. What I want is for half our kids to leave with 2 years of college credit in hand. I know that might sound remarkable, but the higher ed partner we're talking to didn't blink an eye, and they're ready to jump right in with us, and even potentially look at the concept of awarding an associate's degree to those students who meet this benchmark that can be taken and transferred somewhere else. Right? I do not mean the kids that are in the top, looking for a top 10% college. Right? Those colleges may not. Harvard's not going to accept Running Start credits or dual enrollment credits from us. Okay, so this is not necessarily our most high-end learners, and that's okay. But for our bread and butter students, I think about half of them, this is a real advantage that we have. That other school systems around us cannot do this. They cannot do this. They don't have a grading and reporting system that's based on competency that allows for that flexibility. They don't have performance assessment that can show how our students are progressing more quickly or more slowly than other students and then give us the opportunity to adapt. And like our number one advantage that we have, other district towns around us are not willing to innovate to the extent that we are, and therefore don't probably have the same opportunity that we have in this space. So, we need measures to show that we're successful. And so, the key measures in a system that I'm describing to you is number one, most importantly, the percentage of our students who actually meet the goals in their plans. Right? If we have individual plans for every student with goals for every kid, We should be measuring how many of our kids are hitting their goals. The goals need to be rigorous, they can't be easy, but we should be able to measure that and then know how successful we're being. Voter support each March. That is a key indicator of our success and our ability to communicate what our needs are and to have that support. And then whether our growth targets as a system are achieved. But we need to balance that with statewide rankings on high stakes tests. No one says we need to forget about the SAT or about the New Hampshire SAS test. Those are important tests that still that matter, that determine whether people move to this table or not, because that's what people evaluate, right? So those things still matter. And then finally, our qualitative rankings by our key constituents, meaning when we ask people in our school system how we're doing, what they say to us. Believe it or not, that's probably the number one most important factor in what leads to people, how they vote, right? We know that that's interrelated. But when people think about a school system, whether it's good or not, it's about how they feel about the school system. It's hard for those of us who like quantifiable data, but it's really qualitative information, how people feel about how we're doing. Okay? If those key measures are going well, are going in the right direction, then the secondary measures, the impact measures, will be things like this. Our graduation rates should improve, our home values should go up, enrollment should increase. All of these things should be better relative to our peers or relative to where they are today, if we're doing everything right in our key measures. What do we need to be in place for us to be successful with the plan that I outlined for you? First, a fully articulated curriculum that we have to know what our students need to know to get through our school system. Right? We're close there. A standards-based reporting system. We're close there. An effective administrative team. I'm working on it. Right? I'm working on it. A functional teacher supervision and evaluation coaching system where our teachers are constantly giving feedback in order to improve their practice. Appropriate school year calendar, day schedule, etc. This starting with the time our school day starts and ends. We are not going to go year round and have school in the summer. That's something that is anathema in this town. We're not going to do that. However, we need to have appropriate scheduling options within the deal breakers that our communities provide for us. Okay? So, believe it or not, key measure of our success, our building block for us, is whether we have a supportive school board with the proper area of focus. Right? I loved when John said earlier, we need to think about our policy season next year, about the policies that will enable our strategic plan to be successful. Right? Because that's one of the core functions of a board, and he's right on the money account. We don't have community support, we're not going anywhere. Right? We are not going anywhere without community support. We need that higher ed partner. I'm going to move through some of the rest of these fairly quickly because they're somewhat obvious, but those are some of the things. Let's see. Leveraging technologies. Remember, technology changed the world. Well, it's going to change how we do things as well. So we're implementing objectives and key results as our management structure internally. It's going to be rolled out to our leadership team at the retreat next month, and then to buildings, and then eventually all the way down to our teaching staff over the next couple of years. It will take time to penetrate our school system, but that's going to be our management structure. Our data dashboard system I've talked about quite a bit. We need a new student information system. Those of you who know, have ever heard about MMS or what we have in place, we know that that's not doing the job for us, and there's a committee in place to evaluate future systems. A lot of these are internal systems that we use, but all of these things enable better communication both internally and then eventually externally with our stakeholders that allow us to be more efficient. So we've already identified these kind of internally. I'm going to shift now and I'm just about done, so hang with me. It's been about 40 minutes, I think, right? Yeah. Hang with me. So what has to happen? So the first thing is our communication plan, right? We from here, we're these 20 people or so in a room, and we need the 15 or so thousand between our two communities to be on board with what we're talking about, or at least a significant majority. The first place there is our strategic planning committee. That process fell off the rails. We were not thrilled with what we were getting back from Patel for Kids. We let them go, and we developed this internally that we're presenting to you today. This is not the most highly polished document that we would have liked, but this is better than the money we would have spent elsewhere. But we need to pull that strategic planning committee back together, have me do what I just did for all of you as board members, if you're on board with it, and gather feedback from our strategic planning committee. And then my fall, in my opinion, looks like me going and visiting with several community groups to gather their feedback and input. Right, doing this on a consistent basis, what I just did for you, over and over again, and gathering input and feedback, making tweaks and adjustments, and coming back along the way to provide that feedback for us. I am going to produce an online video series in the fall that walks through some of these different steps in small increments, so it can be available to the community, not just by me visiting them, but online and for them to see. And then really, you think about the time when our community is most engaged. It is the deliberative session every February. So that again will be our chance to communicate this plan yet again, right? So our buildings will be developing individual building level plans based on where they need to go. For example, just thinking about advisory, Sauhegan needs to make some adjustments to their advisory program that already exists. AMS needs to build it from scratch. It doesn't even exist in their building yet, right? So each building will have different individual plans that are all connected and synced up with where we're going as a school system. And then their budget development for this fall has to be reflective of what they need to fall in line with this plan, right? The good news is this is not, if you think about it, there's really nothing we're talking about that is a major shift from what we've already been working towards over the last several years. We're not doing a major course correction where we say we want an international baccalaureate program at our high school, move to homogeneous groupings, right? We're not saying that, right? Someone up the road already does that. What we're talking about is taking the best of what we already are and giving a future direction that's a stretch and that is innovative and is different from what we may have done before. So the budget process is not going to result in significant multi-million-dollar investments that we didn't have before. Don't anyone to worry about that. This is a much more expensive outcome. No, there's going to be expenses, but I think it's going to be changes in how we allocate resources and funds based on what's in our strategic plan. So we have immediate term things that we need to do. We know these are all internal things that we need to work on, and guess what? All of these things are the things we are working on already. Because much of this has become kind of an intuitive part of who we are. But over the next 3 years, these are some of the types of things that have to be done in order to enable us to really hit those 4 strategic priorities that we outlined before. And then we have our long-term sorts of things that are really implementing, at the point of implementation, all of the things we've laid out here today. Beyond that, we even have specific things that we need to do, but that's the level of granularity at this point is well beyond probably many of your ability to keep up with me at this point, because I've talked for a very long time. So I guess I would just pause there and stop talking.
What do you want us to do tonight?
Well,
Question number 1.
yeah, so this board has been pushing me to provide a plan such as this. Have you not? Right?
Yes.
I mean, this is what you've been asking of me to do. So if I'm being honest, I would have preferred to have more time to develop community support and then bring to you. But the reality is that we need to start moving. We've been talking about many of these things for a long time. And so it's probably appropriate now that the board says, yes, we've heard this and we believe that this is the right direction to go. And then to charge all of us, because it's not just me, but all of us need to be on the bandwagon and communicating with our communities about what this plan sort of looks like. So ideally, I would be saying to all of you, if you have major issues with parts of this plan, to identify those now, but otherwise to adopt as a general direction for our school system for the next 10 years, this is where we're heading, so that I can get to work with my team and my staff this summer on making it happen. There will be several opportunities for board and community engagement as decisions have to be made. Right? We're not going to adopt an advisory system at the middle school without telling the board, the Emerson board in that case, what it looks like, how it changes the school schedule, if there's any cost involved, all of those things. So there'll be several opportunities for involvement and engagement. But what I'm looking for tonight is a general sense of this is the direction our school system needs to go, or you kind of missed the mark at it. Right? So it's one of those, maybe it's not that binary, but I'm kind of looking for that.
So I just have one comment and then we can open it up to the board to talk. So some of us were around for the original strategic plan and then have worked on this one as well. And in the original plan, I think we all felt that there wasn't enough community engagement, and that was a big problem. There wasn't enough engagement with our teachers and staff. So understanding that it might feel somewhat the same at this point, I would say that really what we had talked about with the leadership group and working with Adam on this was that it was important to do some heavy lifting and get this SAU-wide plan adopted. And then moving forward, really each district and probably each building is going to have almost their own mini strategic plan that will then funnel up into this. And that is probably a better place to have community and staff and teacher engagement because it's more specific. And certainly anybody can be involved in any of those, but it makes a lot more sense to have the teachers and the staff and parents and community members who are maybe most involved with Sohegan High School working on that and giving their level of engagement. So I think we did a pretty good job of getting community engagement in the beginning of this process, and then it just waned, unfortunately. But I think Adam and his team has done a really good job of pulling all of the information that has been sort of funneling through for a very long time and bringing it all together into something comprehensive that that we can latch onto. But there certainly is a lot more work that has to happen at the more granular level of the districts and the buildings. So that's where I see us moving forward. So I'm really excited about, I think Adam and the team has done a great job of bringing all this information together. It's a lot of information and setting some really high standards for our district that we all should expect. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to other board members who might have questions or comments. Alan?
I just have a comment, and I would agree with you, Amy. I like the idea of maybe little pocket strategic plans, but I think as a parent, historically, one of the challenges I saw in the district was inconsistency from building to building. So I think it's vitally important that there are core values that are not negotiable. It's no big secret that Sohegan High School was sort of the epitome for my kids and for me. It's why we moved to this district, and it was always disappointing for me to not have that feel prior to walking in ninth grade. So that would be my strong comment. We saw a lot of that in this plan. We've talked a lot about it. The action component will be crucially important. So I agree because we're talking about kindergartners compared to ninth graders and et cetera. But I think it's incredibly important that the core values remain the same and that all of the teachers collectively are on board and can build upon from school to school. I think my second comment is for Adam. You asked us to provide feedback after your last one. Did you get a lot from us?
I got some.
So one of my comments was it's a very rigorous plan, and I just a missing spoken part of that was the mental health piece, and I know you commented it's here. I just couldn't see it. I still can't really feel it, and that I think is really important. I think if you question any parent sitting at this table or who's here for public session, is what is the number one thing you want for your child? And it's contentment. Happy is another word, and that's a whole child, not just the academic rigorous component.
No, you mentioned it when I kind of ran through the draft, and my mind was fried at the time, and I didn't, until you just said it just now, I didn't remember. So.
Yeah, I just think it's an important,
Right.
I'm sure, I know you have it in your head and your heart, I know it's there, but it doesn't jump out off the screen.
It's buried under MTSS, which, unless you really know what that
What
means.
is that?
Yeah. And I'll take that.
Other questions or comments? Dave?
I know this isn't really the way we do things here, but you know, the budgeting process is always done by district. And then there's an SAU and whatever. But it doesn't get reported it doesn't have to get reported that way to the citizens. You could basically build a combined budget for the whole SAU, go back 5 or 10 years, track that forward, and see how you can compete or bring some, what's the right word, cost reductions or simplifications or, you know, some sort of efficiency gains and demonstrate that in a combined budget. So the budget process would be each individual district does their own, right? And then they combine it, and then the presentation results in an SAU-wide budget of historical thinking and then back and forth. I mean, it's doable.
Yep. I like that idea.
Because you can tie, you know, I don't know, about 70% of the things that you have up there as targets to budget items that could be produced one way or the other on that plan. It's a much more compelling argument.
To look at it as a whole system as opposed
Yes,
to
exactly.
individual parts. Makes sense.
Other comments from the board? Questions? Laura?
Where you have the model where the student success is measured by academic, social, and emotional, I submitted to Adam several paragraphs of why I think social and emotional should not be measured for students, and why I felt that way.
Yeah, it would never be measured on a report card, right? It would never be measured in the same way or even reported out in the same way. So I don't mean to imply that, and you did send compelling information. I think that we still need to be, with individual students, tracking in some way their growth in areas where that's a barrier to the extent it's a barrier to learning, right? So in a totally different orbit than their academic successes and measures. But I still feel strongly that's something we need to at least track, in some cases on a student basis. And actually not for every kid. It may not be something that's an issue for many of our kids. And that's fine, we wouldn't need to do that. But for some kids, I think it needs to be called out and tracked and supported with specific interventions as well. To that extent, it needs to be measured. But you're right, maybe I should make it more explicit that there's not a grade for a math competency or a score for math competency and then for resiliency next to it, right? Or for your depression score is. I don't want to imply that at all.
However, there are work study practice marks now, and some issues may be inferred, you may not specific issues, by low achievement on work study practice.
No, that's actually a good point. That's the purpose of the work study practice measurements is somewhat tied to the emotional and social growth of our students.
I think setting those social and emotional goals with individual education. What are we calling it? Individual?
Student success plans.
Yes, thank you.
Well, ILP,
Is
individual
really-
learning plans.
Could be that too.
It's
That's what she
very
said.
encouraging for those students who struggle with the social and emotional component. And I think that has a lot to do with that grounding you built.
So perhaps changing the terminology so it's
Yeah.
not seen as, because I get your point, Laura, you know, we're not measuring in a similar way that we would measure academics. So it's, I think the intent is that we want to make sure we recognize if there's an issue and that we provide supports to help that student meet goals and move along and progress. Other comments or questions? So I know we have public input after we would be voting on this, but I think, okay. I was just gonna say, I'll let the board talk, but it might make sense to have, if the board doesn't object, to have folks from the public talk about this before we vote. Is everyone okay with that? Okay. So go ahead, Terry.
I was just gonna say that the individual plan, like when we were introduced to this last month, he said that's really, really already we're asking so much of our teachers, so much of every one of our staff, and that seems like really hard to achieve. But yet, the number one thing I hear from parents, and just today and yesterday, there's a lot of questions about grading and about, this morning, that's how I started my morning, was talking to Dr. Bernasconi and to Christine, and we were talking about grading and how even very involved parents who've been trying to follow it are still feeling a little bit, we're still in the process of change, and change is hard, and they were trying to see the value and really make sure they understood where their students were at. And one of the things that I hear is, it's great for kids, our low-performing kids who have things like IEPs and 504s, because they get to have individual plans, and they get to visit those once a year. And I can tell you that my child has had a plan for certain things that were not academic, that were more social emotional for her when she first started. And it was wonderful to get that opportunity to really say twice a year, once at the beginning when you're setting the plan, and once at the end say, how's it all going, to really be able to look at a very individual way. And if you don't have a child who meets that threshold of needing one of those, it's like, well, what about my kid? I want to have that kind of individual attention for my kid. Why don't they get that? Because they're doing too well? And so it's really wonderful to me that we're looking at this as saying every student is worthy and valued and has their own measure of success and their own goals. And it gives that opportunity, and the logistics of finding a way to support it is going to maybe be a little bit painful in the beginning as we figure it out, but it is so worthy of a goal to have, because the ones who have that now get so much value from it. And as a parent who's been able to benefit from that, I can tell you there's so much value from it. And right now we're on, thankfully, it really worked for my child, and she's just enough kind of, let's watch and see. But I still love getting to have that conversation every year, to say, great, nobody has any big concerns, neither do we. I get to hear some lovely things, and we move on and we say, let's keep watching. And it's great to have that opportunity. So I think that giving that opportunity to all kids and to all parents is just a hugely beneficial thing. And that is, if you take away nothing else from this, being able to really say that every child is their own success story, and how do we help you get to what's successful for you. And whether that is college, whether that is a trade, whatever it may be, and those goals along the way. It was really fun when I went to, what's it called, the 7th grade?
Product Safeguard.
Thank you. Product Safeguard. And it's been a long day. And so, Project Safeguard, and we went and I went to Overcoming Challenges, and it wasn't, I didn't get to go to the magic show, which is what I wanted to be at. I got to go to Overcoming Challenges, so I felt like it was important. I wanted to hear kind of the challenges that students felt like they were having and why they were there. And it was really interesting that at one point, he asked kids, why did you choose this one? And they said, well, because I wanted to kind of I wanted to see how you overcame, because I want to get to, and one wanted to get a pilot's license, and another one wanted to become, he wanted to go play lacrosse at a really high level school, and those were their personal goals, and they wanted to make sure they could reach those goals. So we have kids that have goals, and so as a school, if we can find a way to support all of those goals, whether some of them are going to be academic and some of them are going to be just their life goals, that we're looking at whole students, and we say it all the time, that we want to take care of the entire student. And I think that a plan like this gives us tools to do that. It gives us the ability to do that. And so that was my largest takeaway from it. And I don't know, I can't speak for all of you, but that's the thing that gets me the most excited. Because I feel like speaking to parents, and I do a lot of talking to parents, and I'm involved in a lot of things, maybe too many. And so I get to talk to a lot of people, and that's the number one thing I hear, is that people really want to make sure that their kid is seen, they're heard, and they're treated like an individual. And I think that something like this is going to allow that to happen.
Thank you, Terry.
Just one question.
Yep.
So if we're gonna talk about voting, I wanna dive more into that 2-year college credit. I had sent you an email. Because, you got it? I did. SAU email, doesn't like me.
I don't
So-
believe I did, yeah.
Okay, so my question in the email was, then what? So initially, when you, of course, do college tuitions, right? So initially, I was like, heck yeah. Then when I processed it a little, I was like, then what? So for 50% of the students to then graduate with 2 years of college and to be, you know, enrolled in a regular college, are you taking level 200 courses with juniors? We've talked about the maturity of a graduating senior compared to a junior in college, and the idea that a lot of these kids will probably hang out for another year. So,
So a couple things. First, one track we could take would be to let kids graduate early. If we're saying
from college.
from high school, right? We could say as a strategy, let's make it so that our kids can graduate when they're ready to graduate academically. Fundamentally, I don't believe that's appropriate.
Because you mentioned that in the last meeting.
I think our students are, if anything, it could be that the next generation of our students evolve where they're not graduating from high school at 18, that it's later in life, because people are living longer, people are waiting longer to start their adult life, and yet we still end students at 18. We're not going there either. But I think the last thing we should do is try to graduate kids at 14, 15, or 16 from high school. I don't think they're ready for the next step yet. So if we're giving them, we're saying we're going to keep them to 18 to give them another option, then what does that then what look like for them? The higher ed partner we're working with, they currently offer an abbreviated degree program for their students, and they found that fewer of them are taking advantage of it because they still feel college is a 4-year process, right? That they want the 4-year college experience in some way, shape, or form. So the advantage might be that our students could now get what's used to have the gravitas of a bachelor's degree is now what? A master's degree, right? In many fields, you have to have a graduate degree to be able to participate in that field. So I'm suggesting that for most of our students, they might still get out of college at roughly the same age, but maybe with a master's degree instead of just a bachelor's. That's one thought. Other kids might start as a junior in college, spend 2 years and be done at 20, but that would be their choice at that point that they wouldn't have had before.
Because then we're sending 20, 21-year-olds into the workforce, competing with every other school district where the kid is 23. It's a big range, as we know, until supposedly 25. We haven't hit it yet in our house.
But some of the trends emerging from our society are what? There are more kids taking gap years in high school and college. There are more kids taking internships or work years between when they start because they're taking longer to enter adulthood.
That's a whole other conversation. I have a daughter dealing with that. She has a summer birthday. We sent her to school on time. Everybody at her liberal arts college has taken a gap year. She's so young. She's going to be the designated driver for like her entire college career, which is fine with me. But I think that's a component of this. You know, we've seen a lot of families leave Amherst and go to private schools and re-enroll their freshmen who had a year at Souhegan as a freshman again. Eighth grader as an eighth grader again. So, you know, pulling that back and then offering that college credits, that's probably something that could be part of an individual learning plan.
Could I dovetail off that a little bit? That's, in the vision is only half the students. What about the other half? That's where the community partnerships with businesses and small businesses, and you could have apprenticeship programs with tradespeople, master craftsmen in their fields. I mean, the scope of the extra skills and the advancements that you could get with the whole 100% could range very widely.
So many expectations. Nothing compared to anything we ever dealt with as teenagers. There are so many. So to add, okay, now you know you're not in the 50% who got your college tuition. Oh, you don't have a certificate. So we're adding to that list. We have to be very mindful of that. We have increased anxiety and depression. We have an increase in suicide. We have big issues. That's that mental health component. It's crucially important because all I see is, oh, we're gonna now. Not only do you have to play 3 sports and be a great student, you also need to have a certificate and graduate with 50% college credits.
So the only thing on the college, that is not going to be for students who are applying to competitive and highly competitive colleges. Those students are not going to be looking to get those college credits because those schools are not going to accept them. So they're going to be taking their college prep courses. So I think I just want to make that distinction that this is really for students who perhaps, you know, we see a lot of students who, because of costs, are going to National Community College and taking their gen eds and then transferring to UNH. That's very common. So this will give students who may want to do that the ability to get that work done, some of that work done in high school, and then move on to a state school. So that's
As well
really the
as-
idea.
In exchange for their high school credits or on top of?
On top of.
And then saying as well, we would like you also to have your certificate and potentially your pilot or your babysitter or your Red Cross certified.
So let me say this, I believe that we are not giving enough challenge to many of our students. I think that the pace of high school is not enough for many of them. Not all of them, but for many of them. And so, and there's one thing that if you ask many kids in our high school, and we're only talking about Sauhegan right now, that's missing from school, an element of engagement that they miss. It starts with F. Fun. Right?
I would say down to kindergarten,
Right? Would you agree
not
with
just
that?
in high school.
So, so in my world, when I have control over my own destiny and my own progress as an individual, and there is real autonomy there that has guideposts, there's still gonna be bumpers in the bowling lanes, because it's high school, we're not gonna set kids totally free. But when I have true autonomy, I have more fun in my life too. I have to tell you that I believe that our students are lacking from the ability to push themselves as fast as they want to go in some areas and go deeper in areas that are more of interest to them.
You need to build the strategy around that.
Yeah, because I think that also
We've been,
comes with teacher.
I've been saying this for years, is that all of this, everything you put together here, Adam, is great. It's the scaffolding that'll make what you just said happen. But if you can't, I've said this to you before, if you can't boil down, if this group can't boil down what we're trying to do in 30 seconds or less, or 10 words or less, we are trying to do, people just aren't going to get it. People aren't going to get it. They don't have, people nowadays, I mean, we just had a political debate last night where they're like, oh, this person spoke for, 10 minutes. Like the number one, about 2 hours, this candidate spoke for 10 minutes. It's ludicrous. So, I mean, the Lincoln Douglas debate's been on for 5 hours. So, my point is we've got to have it. Plus, the organizational unit has to have that level of clarity. Teachers and administrators, they have so much going on. You just said like 47 pages. So that when they have problems at home, and when they're depressed, and they have parents knocking on them, and they walk into school during a snowstorm because they thought they were going to have the day off, and they say, what am I responsible for today? They can anchor to that, right? They can anchor to that, like we are a low-fare airline, or whatever, They can anchor to that, so that that's the thing that they anchor to. I think this is great, but as a community, we have to decide what that is. We have to decide, I think we're getting there with the why, we're like 85% there. The last time I saw us, we're like 70% there. Now we're like 85% there. But we've got to get that level of clarity, because the other piece to it is a little bit where Dave's going, is that you said this fits in our wheelhouse, we're kind of doing this already, and I agree with you. However, personalized education is a big lift. If it weren't a big lift, every school in the country would be doing it, because our lives are personalized now through technology. Our schools are not personalized, and that's why schools aren't working. So to go to personalized education is the right thing. It's also a costly thing. So we have to decide, what are we not going to do that we already do, that traditional schools do? What are we not going to do so we can do this other thing that we think is super fantastically important really well? And like, my kids are athletes, I don't want to say we want to take away sports and stuff, but maybe there's just stuff on that side of the ledger we don't do. Maybe there's stuff that we farm out. Maybe there's, I don't know what it is, but we have to get really good at this thing. So that means we have to not do other stuff.
We have a lot of antiquated systems.
A lot.
Yes, well, I wanted to let the board talk first. So I think, I know Laura, did you have your hand up, Laura?
Yeah.
Okay, so I had Laura and then Beth.
I raised my hand
Sorry.
a while ago.
What's that?
Sorry,
I
I
raised my hand a while
hijacked
ago.
it.
Oh, I'm
Getting
sorry.
hijacked.
Okay, all right, go ahead. Go ahead, Beth. Go ahead, Beth, where you?
Back to what Ellen said. So I see those 2 years of college credits kind of, instead of having to double the amount of workload these kids are taking for 2 years to get those credits, it's kind of a sort of a replacement. All right, you have to take X math. We're gonna let you now take this college level math class instead to fulfill this high school requirement. It's kind of the way I understood it, Adam.
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah, it's.
So it's
running
not,
short.
we're not asking for them to do
Yeah,
double the work. We're replacing some of their high school level work with college.
Which we already have dual enrollment
Right.
courses, so it would just be expanding that program.
So, and then,
And making it more flexible.
Yep.
and kind of, so to go along with what Ellen, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, yep, you're right.
Like, so Ellen mentioned her concern with, the level of anxiety and things like that. I kind of see having the students fully engaged in their lives and having that team that works with them to help them reach these goals. I kind of envision this helping reduce that level of anxiety because they know, right now we throw them in and you are responsible for managing it yourself. You know what your goals are. It's kind of this here you go, sink or swim, it's up to you. Whereas this plan gives them that team that's gonna help support them along with it. So that it should, I would hope, reduce the level of stress and anxiety that our students face because they are getting that frequent check-in with their adult advisor or whatever whatever word that is going to be. They is going to, okay, so you're running into this problem. How are we gonna help you through that? And it's more of a, they're getting the support they needed within the schools to make sure making sure these goals are gonna happen for them rather than allowing it to happen by themselves. And, this self-responsibility without the supports of our schools, our teachers, our administrators, the educational plan that we have to get them there. So it should help.
Along with parents, so.
Along with the parents, yes.
Alright, so I'm gonna jump to Laura because she's been patiently waiting. Yes.
My only, I've had, I guess, 9 years of the middle school right now and the high school with 3 kids coming through. And I have a hard time remembering when I've had a parent-teacher conference at all. Like, it's few and far between. It's usually only on request, and we haven't had issues that required it. I don't think the teachers are really, my last, our open house, the teachers were like, email us if you have a question. I mean, they're using technology too, like, please contact us, but it's not necessarily face-to-face. So I don't know whether the teachers don't have time, they're learning in power, they're doing lots of other things in the classroom, and are they going to have time to implement the strategic plan? Even now, there's not a lot of interaction, it's minimalized.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I think that a lot of those issues should come up when we get to the individualized district or building level strategic plans and flush those issues out. I think that's, the goal is to have an anchoring adult for all students and to implement all of these other initiatives, I'm not to say initiatives, all of these other right, goals, but I think there certainly will be specific building and district level issues that will have to be ironed out. So, all right, I had Sarah next.
So I just want to kind of echo a little bit of what Laura was saying about kind of lack of engagement with communication from teachers even now. So I have a concern about that. And my other concern is about the students who are not exceptional self-directed learners. I mean, it feels like this is being built around kids who either have the propensity to excel or to direct themselves and know how to do that, but I still wonder about the ones that don't. And I don't hear any sort of safety net there. I mean, you talk about an anchoring adult, we have advisory in Sauhegan now, and that's not anchoring some students. So I'm wondering how that's going to be addressed, because I'm really uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, so I'm going to share a personal opinion now, which I don't want to sound as, I want to be careful to not, well, to say it. I think Sauhegan's advisory system needs to grow and evolve. I don't think it's working for as many kids. As I understand how it was first envisioned and what it looks like today, from what I understand, are two very different things. And I've not been there from the beginning. But that's my understanding. And I am not someone who believes that changing advisors every year is helpful. I think there needs to be significant forethought into matching students with their advisor to make sure that those particular types of kids don't fall through, because I think that's, I'll just share my own personal experience. As a sophomore advisor 3 years ago, I spent a year getting to know a group of kids. I tearfully engaged in roundtables at the end of sophomore year, and then was devastated to say goodbye to them and to not have them for the rest of their high school career. I know that there are times that there are some advisors who are more engaged than others, and some that are probably better and worse. I get all of that. But the students who are not self-directed would probably do best having someone that's going to engage with them for 4 years. And in my opinion, if that person is now charged with being the keeper of a plan for a student during that time, then there is accountability built into that system that doesn't exist today. There is not a lot of accountability in the advisory system as it exists today. Just my opinion.
I hear you. I just would push back on that it's not just, I don't think it has to be just reliant on the advisor. There's the teacher level as well.
I think there's benchmarks.
Yeah.
I think
No,
with an individual
that's a fair
education
point.
plan, there's
So
more aggressive.
that makes me feel more comfortable what you said, but still, I would push back on, if teachers aren't doing it today, what makes you think they're gonna do it tomorrow?
That's a fair point.
With all this extra stuff to do. And I fully respect teachers, I have a family full of them, but
No, your point's well
it's a
taken.
hard job, but that's what I'm saying, is how can we expect them to do all of this, which sounds exceptional, but how can you expect them to do all that when they're struggling to do it today on learners who are identified as having issues, not in an IEP necessarily, but vocally identified as struggling. So I just wonder about that.
Yeah, so,
Just something to consider, I don't,
well, I might be pie in the sky sometimes, okay, realize that.
me too.
Okay, I understand that. However, if, in my opinion, if I've got 12 to 14 kids that I'm really responsible for,
Yeah,
then it doesn't mean I take, I do less with the other 65, the other 80 that I teach in my academic classes. It doesn't mean that. But I do think it means that I'm more likely to seek out those other teachers of those 12 or 14 I have as my advisory kids to follow up and make sure that the engagement happens at the advisor to teacher level, if not the parent to teacher level, right? Like I think it changes the dynamic a little bit. That's what I need it to do. If it doesn't do that, then I'm not sure it's worth it in the first place.
that's what I would need it to do too,
Right.
for me to buy in.
John, thank you.
Yeah, it's all good. I just dovetail on what Jim was saying about finding the right budget items and the buckets. It's perfect. Ironing out the details, but we should remember that at this level, I think you had 1 or 2 slides, we're already doing this, we're already doing this. I mean, the foundational cornerstones of this is already laid. We have multi-tiered systems of support for our lowest learners. We can scale that up and find a way to do it. We're already engaging non-classroom teachers and non-teachers in the movement of providing multi-tiered systems of support for students. There's no reason why we can't take that model and just expand upon it. We have an advisory system. It needs some modernization, but that could be pushed down. There's models already. We're not really have to craft much from scratch. So yes, a heavy lift, and maybe some more resources are going to be spent, but it's not it's not something that we have to fully invent on our own. We've been already building it for, I don't know, for at least the last 10 years, I would say that. And that gives us a whole lot of energy and makes us a whole lot easier to then ask the questions that Sarah and others have been asking about. Well, here are these little details about how are we going to make this really click. Great, it's awesome to have that conversation instead of we don't have a system of advisory, we don't even know where to begin. So I just want us to remember we're well on our way to achieving some of these goals already.
Jim?
I think you're overly optimistic and not quite grounded in reality. And I think it speaks to Sarah's point. No, John, and I appreciate it, but this is my view. In order for this to work, Adam's linchpin of the system work is to have an anchoring adult where the child is known, valued, and supported. And my personal feeling is we're going to need a lot of those people. It's not going to be advisory, it's not going to be a teacher. I mean, if I would go as far as saying it's not going to be an advisor, like we have to nuke that language because an advisor has a connotation of either being an advisory or it has a connotation of being in a guidance department somewhere. Even a guidance department is completely antiquated in terms of conceptually what they do. You know, I think anybody who's sitting at this table who has had a kid go through Sauhegan has had wildly variable levels of experience in guidance. Nothing against them, but just because the whole concept is outmoded. So I think Adams.
Tell us who it is instead of who it isn't.
Right. I think it's
really,
just.
tell us who it is instead of who it isn't.
Yeah.
Like, who is it? Who is that not advisor? Like,
Well, this is what I'm saying, is I think that Adams' strategic, the thing he's building his plan on is the right thing. But what I'm saying is, I think this is gonna be a lot more challenging and resource intensive than maybe we're prepared for, and we have to accept that. This anchoring adult, to me, is the fulcrum upon what this strategic plan rests upon. And that's why I keep saying, so to your point, like I agree with you, but I don't have the same worries you have because I don't see this as being an advisor or this being restructuring advisory. I see this as a major investment in people who are going to, know, value, and support these children in a very intensive way. So that's heads. So that's why I keep saying, so what are we not going to do? Because to me, that the human resource cost in the strategic plan that's intensive. So to me, it's a detail, John, but it's a major strategic detail to me. And I agree with it. I think we should do it. I support it. I'm just saying, I don't think it's going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think any other school system in the state's prepared to do it. I think that we are. But it's going to be a lift. I think we just need to be ready for it.
Well, one question is if we're not leveraging our entirety of our existing workforce to serve this role, and we pay our staff very well, and if certain people are unable to adopt it and embrace it and be a part of it, whether you're a classroom teacher or you're not, we have a lot of staff already who and provide the resources and the rollout and the professional development and all of this stuff. But if they're not buy-in, then maybe that's not the place for you to work in the future. That may be the question that some of our existing staff have to answer for themselves. Are they going to embrace the future or not? And I don't think that we should let that risk stop us from trying to engage our existing workforce to ease some of the burdens that you raise and to test whether or not we have the numbers that are correct in order to serve the students in an appropriate way.
Maybe.
What's the saying?
Was there an alternative?
List,
Hire a
should
brand
we
new
let
staff
them
of people to come in with a totally separate job of being the mentor or whatever the word we choose is? I mean, I don't see that as being particularly
The linchpin of Adam's plan from the beginning, and he's used this words before since he's been here, is that our children will be known, valued, and supported.
Right.
And I agree with him I'm saying I agree with him. But what I am saying is that this is not a tweak to advisory. It's not advisors. It's not people in the guidance department. It's not teachers who would do this part-time. In my view, these are people who are going to come in, we're gonna have to hire them, they're gonna have to have the right credentials, and they're gonna have to have the right ability to deal with a multiplicity of different kids. We're gonna need Shilu times 30 or whatever. Because you're gonna have kids who come in who are depressed. You're gonna have kids come in who are schizophrenic. You're gonna have kids who come in who are in a drug problem. You're gonna have kids who come in who are gifted, who can go to Brown on a presidential scholarship. You're gonna have kids who are athletically gifted, okay? I'm sorry, garden variety people are not gonna be able to handle that. They're not gonna be able to handle that. And
But that person would then go find those people or help to keep you mentor.
So I think
whatever
a
the
lot
plan is, I'm just saying, whatever the plan is. I'm not saying I have an answer. I'm not saying we can't do it. I'm just, it's follow-up to what Sarah said and what John said. That it's not gonna, we should commit to it, but it's not going to be easy. And we have to be really focused on what it is and why it is we're going to do this, so that the public supports us, and then decide, which is the hardest part in developing a strategy. If we don't do this, we will fail. We have to decide what not to do. We have to decide that. If we don't make that leap and decide what not to do, and just keep running other things the way they've always done, this will fail. Mark my words. I've been through strategic efforts before. The ones that fail are the ones that say, we're going to do this special thing over here that's shiny and gold, but we're going to keep doing this garbage over here. And the garbage is always an anchor that pulls the whole thing under the water and drowns everybody. That's all I'm saying.
On that we agree, echo that.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. We just need to be prepared for that. That's all I'm saying. So I'm sending up that flag, you know, that red flag with the black square in the middle of it. Like,
We see it,
yeah.
it's there.
And I think that a lot of that work will have to happen at the individual districts, because advisory in Clark Wilkins is going to look a lot different than what it looks like at the high school. So I think we had one more board member, and then I wanted to send it over to the public. You all set?
Yeah.
You sure? Okay, so I saw Peggy's hand up for a long time, and then I'll move along. So
In
if you want to
19
just introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Peggy Silva. I was founding faculty member at Souhegan High School, and I wrote the book about the high school. In 1992, when Souhegan opened, well, in 1991, the administrators were hired for a year to work together to plan the high school. And then in the summer of 1992, 55 of us who were the founding faculty members came together for 3 weeks before the high school opened. We had a template of what might our high school be, but the plans and practices didn't come into being until the 55 people sitting in a circle decided what should our school look like, what's a team, how do we teach math, how do we do this? And it became ours. So I'm in for everything you said before, Adam. I thought it was a great plan, and I'd love to spend hours talking about it. However, I won't.
You might.
Yeah, over time I will.
Maybe not today.
But I would behoove you to recognize the budgetary implication of this plan at its outset and say, if that becomes a template that you hand to teachers, and it becomes Souhegan High School 2.0, and you call them together for X number of weeks at the beginning of, in August, as we did in 1992, and you say, here's the board's best thinking about what the future should look like in your high school. Now take it and figure it out and come back to us. Because it's the people implementing it who have to make it their own. And they can't make it their own without a lot of time. So that's number one. My second-
Peggy, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it
really
has to
exciting.
happen. Those 3 weeks were really 3 of the most important weeks of my entire life. And where it started was what? And where it ended was, I'm gonna be on a team with 80 people, with 80 students, and I'm gonna work with, I had a template in mind. It became mine through those weeks. And I was working with 55 strangers who became really important to me. The second thing speaks to Ellen's point, and that's the hurried child syndrome. I would say that one conversation that I'd love to see the board have at some point was looking at the town of Amherst and looking at the high-pressured town of Amherst from the parental point of view. If I had one of those 1% kids, my youngest child I'm sure was swapped at birth, and somewhere there's a mediocre child walking the earth. But Carrie was at the top 10%. And NWEA measured her growth and her achievement. But what it didn't see was that she was an actress full-time after going to high school, and that she was on a town committee, that she would come home and be so angry because she said, none of the adults know how to attend a meeting. They all need to go to Southegan High School and learn how to behave at a meeting. So I worry, I have a caution, it's not that I worry, but I have a caution about the part of the plan that requires students to do more when I see students doing so very much. I can't imagine having 10 more minutes in my kid's day to do one more thing. And yeah, so those would be I love the idea, and I'm really excited by it and wish I were still working so that I could be
Oh, I
part
have a
of
feeling
it.
you might be.
My officer upstairs, I can write a contract. 7 seconds.
But until you have your teachers in place looking at the plan, I wonder whether your vote could be the spirit of the vote rather than the fiat of the vote, because those are your practitioners that you need on board. And how much fun it would be to watch them take this, and yep, they're gonna have all sorts of buy-in or not, and you can measure that and you can do with it what you want, but they've got to own it before you can move forward. So I've got all sorts of things, and I'm going to write you a note, long note tomorrow, I promise.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you, this was fun to
Thank
listen
you,
to
Peggy.
tonight.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Kelly Schmidt.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Kelly. I didn't see.
Yeah, we've got a
Pull in the way.
So I'm really happy that the whole conversation went towards the concern of advisory, whatever it would be called, and component, because that's kind of, from my personal experience, I went to Brown and we had a very autonomous, the whole thing was autonomy, that's their founding linchpin, with advisors in place. Well, the one issue with that is you just took a teacher and you stamped, you're an advisor on it. And it was with whatever program you started on. I started in engineering, great, not what I wanted. Then for the remaining 3 years, I was completely adrift without an advisor of any kind, because that's who my assigned advisor was. It was the only thing he knew. It was the only thing. So my concern and point that I want to make is whatever system you put in place needs to be flexible enough with the student to know that some people are not the right fit with certain students, but that you also need training for it. The one thing that I really have liked all the discussions on the whole change for curriculum is how much effort you have put in to trying to teach the teachers a whole new methodology of grading and stuff like that. You need to do that with an advisor position too. These are people who, most of them, even if they've just come out of college, but they've had years and years of experience doing things one way. They don't, and that way is to, teach material.
and to assess a student and stuff like that. It's not to be, I don't know, in my mind, the role equates to the same thing as what a lot of people are hiring as life coaches when they're adults. So it's not to be a life coach. The whole life coach, thing, there's a lot of education that goes behind those. There's a lot of skill sets, a lot of things. And so if that's what we're asking to implement into our schools for our students to direct through, it's really critical that you provide that structure for whomever that is. If it's taking a teacher that already teaches and adding stuff to them, or if it's hiring outside extra people. I'm just concerned that it would be a stamped on position and not really something that will fully help the student in that way, that it's intended to. Which that was one of the reasons I went to Brown, because I liked that philosophy and that, side of it. But I think it's a lot in how you implement it.
Yeah, so,
So.
if I could have 2 minutes?
Yep.
So I think that's such critical feedback. With permission, I'm just going to share some additional thoughts. So we used to hire teachers that were prepared in a specific area of subject matter expertise and then sometimes do something about teaching. Not always, but it used to be that it was sometimes, I was a history major and then I got my master's in education, right? That's kind of how we thought about it. And I wasn't explicit in my plan yet because I wanted there to be time for conversation, but you folks are all kind of seeing the future a little bit. I think we need more people that are great at relating to students and building relationships with kids, where I don't care as much if they know as deeply about math, because we've got Khan Academy that does a great job with some of the math content, right? I'd rather have someone that's with math, but really can relate to kids, knows when to get in and really push a kid, knows when to hug him, and knows when to get in, and knows the difference of the time to do that, right? Like I almost feel as if the role has to change, that it could be, to Jim's point, that there are people that are better at this, the relationship part, who we have less academic responsibilities for. There might be others that are so good at this that have no responsibility with the advisory piece, right? I think we need to stop thinking that teachers have to be advisor, athletic coach, club advisor, math teacher, XYZ PDQ, right? I think it's okay for us to be able to start saying that perhaps some of our staff moves in this direction as a focus while others move in that direction. And I really hate to say this, but it means that other positions in the building no longer are as necessary as they were before, right? That you guys are thinking steps ahead that I was trying to not get to quite yet. But that's the reality of how this might look, is that there are some that are really great in the classroom and not with this. And there are others that are really great with this that we might say, you know what, you don't have to do as much of that anymore. And honestly, do we think Peggy Silva might be able to be an anchoring adult for 3 or 4 kids? Right?
Really expensive.
It should be.
But is there an assumption, right, it shouldn't be, I left it ambiguous, I didn't want to talk about this quite yet, but I just want to put it out there. I'm not assuming that all of those anchoring adults are full-time faculty in the school either. Our community has other people that have things to give. Not every adult who's got an interest, I don't mean that. I think some people have to know kids, they have to know education, they have to have some connection. But we have other people like that too. So everything you're saying, I agree with. It sounds like a miserable experience for a kid to be at Brown 3 years adrift because you had a bad experience with a connecting adult. We can't have that happen.
Are there other, so Shannon first and then Amanda?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shannon.
So I just, first want to say, like, it sounds exactly like the same place, I'd love to send my kids. Like, it sounds amazing. I'm really happy to hear Mr. Manning's comments about the realities of it and how it's kind of going to play out with the voter. That's why I'm here, that's why I attended all the strategic planning meetings. I want to be a champion in the community for this, because I think we need a strategic plan, and I think we need something and we need people who understand it.
So drilling down to, you know, those talking points that are digestible and that people can understand are critical. And I think the reality of how this looks at Sauhegan, how it looks at AMS, how it looks at Clark Wilkins is very different for a number of reasons. One of which is space. This is gonna take bodies, it's gonna take space. We failed to pass anything in Amherst last budget season, so I have, you know, just a concern with, I think community buy-in is important, right? And I agree with Amy that it makes more sense to have the foundation laid, right? And kind of guide people before you get too many cooks in the kitchen, absolutely. My ask to this board would be that before you reach out to the community again, really make sure you're ready to continue with any engagement that you have with them. I went to every meeting, actually, I attended every strategic planning committee meeting. Not an easy task for most people, myself included. My husband travels, I have 4 kids, so it required babysitters, it required, you know, hardships on my family. And heard from lots of folks in the room like, oh, we've done this before. Doesn't matter what we say, they're just gonna do what they want anyway. No, they're not. No, we're part of this. And now, and again, I agree with this method of handling it, but because the public has already sort of been engaged and then not engaged and then kind of engaged again, my concern is that it fuels folks who already want to say no to things. That's my concern. Is how you roll it out, when you roll it out, when you ask people for their opinion. Like, don't ask until you're ready. And then, like, be ready to fully receive it. And again, I love it. Like, this is awesome. This is the kind of environment I want for my children. And I know that this isn't the tactical level yet and all the details, but the reality is none of that's really going to be possible if we can't even get some of our aging physical infrastructure like where it needs to be, and we can't right now. So it is pie in the sky. So I hope that was super clear. It's not really and here is someone who's invested and like, and I love that you guys can just figure this all out and then let me show up when it's time to go out and tell me how I can champion and be, you know. But I don't want to find myself, my kids are still young. I don't want to be that person who comes to one of these things in 15 years and says, oh, done this before, doesn't matter. They're just, like, I don't want to get to that place.
I agree.
Ava.
Hi, my name's Ava Boyer. I've lived here for 30 years. I had 2 boys, young men, older men of 30 or 26 who went through the system. So what I appreciated most about the system at the time is it taught them, it helped them understand what kind of learners they were. And that made a huge difference in their ability once they got out into college to actually understand better how to learn and engage, and it helped them understand what their talents and preferences were. So, great experience. I'm going to play off of what you actually were talking about, because what I think you've done, Adam, is articulate a vision. I wouldn't call it a strategy yet, or a strategic plan, but I think what you've articulated is a vision for the future, and it makes a whole lot of sense to me. Even at my age with young kids to worry about, it makes a whole lot of sense. I think without having more meat on the bones, that there's a risk that the idea will get trampled and stepped on. Yeah. Because there are too many people that are like, what the heck is going on? You know, they won't understand it unless it's more clearly articulated. And it needs to be articulated not just by the people inside the system, but other people like this who are interested in this and believe that this really has a possibility of becoming something amazing. So in terms of, excuse me, articulating more of a vision, I think people, in order for them to want to buy into this, you have to have a really compelling story. And you have to also be able to say, and these are the kinds of people that are already on board, and have said they want to come on board. And that may be the university that you've identified, it may be business leaders, it may be people in the community. I think you have to go out with a powerhouse of